Hey everybody, welcome to today's show. It is going to be a fun one. We are talking about the world of synthetic biology and renewable energy. So we're talking about using nature to modify things to help us clean up some of the disasters we've caused, improve medicine, even the health and nutritional content of our food, global implications of this are pretty massive. We'll get into that. We've got a bunch of videos and some images, so it's going to be a fun show and an impactful one. So get your favorite cup of coffee in your comfy chair, and we'll see you right back here in a minute on this week's episode of Quantum Ladder Podcast. Welcome back to Quantum Ladder Podcast. My name is Louis Borges. Joining me as always, my good friend and co-host, Marquise Williams.
What's up, Louis? Ready to get this party started?
Ready to go. It's challenging to find topics that not only we find interesting, but again, we're not making shows for us. We're making shows for the general public, but we always want to find something that's important where if somebody is sitting at home going, I don't know about this, why should I care? Why should I give you an hour and a half of my time? We have that in the back of our minds when we put these together. So we want to bring up things that are important, that are emerging, definitely things that, you're probably not sitting at home reading medical journals or, LLM coding and that type of thing. But, we're a couple of regular dudes. We don't have PhDs, but we do deep dives in these. Some of these shows take a few weeks of research, and we put together what we find online. We filter out the nonsense, and you make your own decisions at home. And the importance of I said this to my wife the other day, all the inventions that are sort of hammer and nail are done. Somebody's already done it. Like, you're not going to wake up and figure out that you could basically engineer a new blender in your basement that works better. I mean, maybe, but even then it would be only at the, home electronics or home appliance level. Anybody that's doing big work is in the world of physics or, thinking about things that are extremely complicated, because let's be honest, most of the easy stuff is done. But, as smart as we think we've created a hell of a lot of problems. Look at the condition of our society, our economy, our planet, even our own health. They say 1 in 2 people is going to die of cancer within the next 30 years. Not that you're going to get it and die within 30 years, but you're likely to have a cancer diagnosis of some point in your life. 50% of people. Maybe there's a way we can take what we've learned and use the nature problem in conjunction with the need for new and developing trends. And synthetic biology is basically that. And we'll cover a lot of the things that you can use it for. I know, Marquise, you've done some deep dives as well. What did you think? This is kind of the first topic like this dealing with, the environment, or, it's not like a global warming Greta Thunberg episode. But what did you think? This was a unique episode to prepare for. What do you think about today's topics?
To prepare for today's topic, I went to a rally and laid my whole body in front of a line of traffic. And I'm kidding. I would never do that.
Did you glue your hands to the pavement?
Glued them to the pavement, man. I'm not moving until we get what we want. No. All seriousness, though, there's a couple things that I want to say. The first thing I want to respond to some of you said. In terms of leading cutting edge technologies and in sciences, there are a lot of topics, and you're right. There's so many things we could talk about. And as a geek nerd doofus, I think we both spend too much time just not just lay people learning this stuff. We want to know what the experts are talking about. We don't just look at like a YouTube video that's really cool, that's graphically, nice. We go into these long form conversations from Lex Friedman and sometimes Joe Rogan, but mostly the Friedman Show and other podcasts that do intellectual the intellectual deep dives into these topics. And it takes a lot of research to go and listen to them talk about terminologies I've never heard of before, talk about sciences, and technologies I've never heard of before, and then having to learn those and then translate them for you. So to your point, it's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun because we're already doing this for ourselves. We're now doing this for you. But yeah, for me, this was a fun prep. For me, it was a fun prep. I think that especially when it comes to the synthetic biology, I look into AI. You know that I'm a big AI guy. I like the AI stuff. There's a lot of things going on in the AI world. If you're not following ChatGPT, they have these new things called GPTs, which are assistants that you can create and make money. So instead of building a new blender, like you said before, they're now building assistants that can help you do pretty much any task you want them to. So the new revolution for economic boom is in AI and science and physics. And when it comes to the synthetic biology, well, there's a guy that I've been talking about for weeks, Mustafa Suleiman, who talks about synthetic biology being the thing that is going to revolutionize not just like the direction of our technology, but us, like biologically, us as a human being. One day we might not be fully organic. We may be a mix between synthetic and organic biology. So to me, that was like, holy crap, what does this mean? Like, who's talking about this aside from Michio Kaku and his cool books about, the physics of the impossible. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, first thing that comes to mind when you think synthetic biology, I was thinking like robot cells. It's a synthetically made, but again, for some reason, robotics always comes to mind. But really, it's taking things we already have or engineering certain bacteria that can do certain purposes. And I mean, this is already happening even on a food level. Like, for example, yogurt.
Yeah.
If you wanted to start your own brand of yogurt, you can get a company in Europe or in, I believe the US does it as well. And every yogurt tastes different because of the bacterial cultures they're using. They're similar.
Yep.
There's literally millions of combinations and even ones that you could change to create new. So the flavor profile will come from a mix of different bacteria that dairy company has chosen to make their specific flavor of yogurt, right? Some are more tart,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And you can have a company make you a bacteria that you use for your own yogurt production. So that's already happening. But now we're going to get into the world of, could that deal with our waste issues? Could we generate biofuels from that sort of thing? Medicines? It's there's a lot more to it. So I put together a couple quick videos, one for this segment and one for the other. And essentially, like you said, we're reading this and listening to long form content, taking in all this information. We want to make it simple and digestible. So I've made a little intro, and I was lucky enough to have some video. Go ahead.
Before you mentioned about making your own yogurt. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, you know me. I gotta say this: if you haven't had a chance to watch it, check out the TV show. And I had to check and see what it's called. It's called Love, Death, and Robots. Fantastic. There's an episode called When the Yogurt Took Over. And I don't want to spoil it for you, but some scientists create a yogurt that accidentally becomes sentient, and it's quite interesting.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
check that.
it's billions and billions of cells, right? And in a
Yep.
very small amount of space. So in theory, there's more life in that cup of yogurt than there is in your entire body, right?
Yep.
So as long as we don't show it AI, we should be good. I think that's the
Yeah,
caveat.
don't do that. Don't do that.
Don't put your yogurt in front of your computer when you're on
No.
AI. But we'll get into synthetic biology. Here's a little clip to get us started, and we'll get your opinion in a few minutes here, Marquise. Can we use nature to help us eliminate the need for oil and gas? What would such a technology look like? Welcome to the world of synthetic biology. Synthetic biology is a field of science that's changing the world as we know it. It's a multidisciplinary field that focuses on living systems and organisms, and it applies engineering principles to develop new biological parts, devices, and systems, or to redesign existing systems found in nature. But what exactly is synthetic biology? At its core, synthetic biology is about designing and building new biological systems that don't exist in nature. It is about taking the building blocks of life and using them to create new things that can help us solve problems in ways we never thought possible. So how does synthetic biology work? At its most basic level, synthetic biology is about taking the genetic code of an organism and using it to create something new. This can involve creating new proteins, enzymes, or even entire organisms. Imagine a world where we can create new biological systems or redesign existing ones for useful purposes. A world where we can predictably create cells or organisms able to produce a wide variety of novel molecules, materials, or even cells for multiple applications. Synthetic biology is bringing together engineers and biologists to design and build novel biomolecular components, networks, and pathways, and to use these constructs to rewire and reprogram organisms. For example, synthetic biology is already being used to create new biofuels that are more sustainable and environmentally friendly than traditional fuels. It's also being used to create new materials that are stronger and more durable than anything we've seen before. And it's also being used to create new medicines that can help us fight diseases that we were once thought to be incurable. This cutting-edge technology is at the heart of the so-called bioeconomy, capable of delivering new solutions to global healthcare, agriculture, manufacturing, and environmental challenges. The future potential of synthetic biology to benefit people and the planet is enormous. It has the potential to create useful changes in crops, improve drugs, stronger materials, and more efficient industrial processes. Synthetic biology will change the way we live our lives. It is a technology that's changing the world one cell at a time.
That was awesome. That was awesome.
You know, you got me started with doing these videos, and now I love making them. It takes a hell of a lot of time, but they turn out good.
Just so you guys know, I am the voice actor here, yet this guy we're coming busting out new voice acting content every week. That was a great video. I will say your enunciation's perfect. You've got great pacing. You know how to line up the video with the images in the background, the video in the background with the script. You're doing a freaking fantastic job for somebody who literally just started doing this stuff. What, like a month or two ago?
Yeah, I never made these
So
type of videos a couple months ago, and the hardest thing is the script because it's actually quite a bit of stuff that goes into like a two and a
yep,
half or even 3 minute long video. It
yeah,
could take you
yeah.
four
I
or
know,
5 hours.
I know.
And to get a script that is coherent, that actually says something, right? Somebody's going to watch it and go, I still have no idea what the hell they're talking about. That doesn't do us any good. So, and this one was particularly difficult because it's like most of these technologies, they're emerging. There isn't specific footage I could show you of like, hey, look, they're doing it
That's
right here.
yeah,
But the
yeah,
implications are massive. And, so I guess the best thing to explain what is synthetic biology to what can it do, essentially, you're taking microorganisms and they harness them for bioremediation. So you could clean pollutants from water, soil, and air. You could modify rice to now produce beta carotene, which is vitamin A. I mean, vitamin A deficiency is one of the biggest issues with malnutrition around the world. There's literally millions
yeah,
of people
yeah,
that eat rice who are also vitamin A deficient. You could change that with something simple. But again, like anything, there's ethical implications. And some people say, well, this is just like gene editing. Well, kind of. I mean, gene editing is done to give a trait something beneficial. You're changing the sort of genome. It could be hair color, eyes. Could also be replacing a therapy that's deficient. This is more like you're modifying creation with the intent to improve medicine or reduce pollution or make clean energies. So it isn't necessarily like enhancing humankind or creating new bugs that you don't know what's going to happen. All they're
yeah.
doing is saying, hey, could we use biology like bacteria to create environmentally safe things? Like, I mean, our oil dependence is massive, we know this.
Right, right.
Plastics is a big problem. Even if people all
Yep.
switch to electric cars, which we'll talk about in the second half, it is not the
Yeah,
solution
yeah.
either.
It's not.
We'll get
There's
to that because as somebody who spent 22 years in the automotive business, I will give you honest and stern advice about electric vehicles. But essentially, we want to cover what the implications are, what this could be used. So I have some slides here just to kind of make more sense of how we're seeing synthetic biology in a day-to-day impact. So we've heard of this impossible meat or beyond meat. Have you heard of this
yeah,
stuff?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
supposed to
You
be vegan-based plant food that tastes and looks like meat, and
yeah.
most of them don't. Most of them are disgusting, but there are a few that are bang on, and they figured out what makes a burger taste like a burger. So here's an example. This is soy protein, a bunch of other vegan-based stuff, pea powders and stuff like that. It's not blood. It is called heme, and in fact, even when you have a steak, it's not blood that's coming out of the steak. It's this product called heme. and they can synthetically modify that in a vegan level so that you literally can have a rare burger. It will taste like a rare burger, but there is no meat inside of that. And I still don't know how I feel about that. What are your thoughts on
I
impossible meats?
I would okay, so for me, listen, man, this is a tough one because I think that when it comes to our food manufacturing, they've already genetically modified most of our food anyway.
Yeah.
And the food that they haven't genetically modified, they've added chemicals that can give us all kinds of ailments that already. So for me, if they're going to do it, and if they're going to do it at all, at least they're doing it for what I think would be a better, a healthier way and healthier options. And I used to be vegan for a time, but it was very difficult to find foods that I could eat that I enjoyed. It got to the point where eating was less satisfying, and eventually I didn't even want to eat. And so I had to change back to a regular diet, which, by the way, wasn't great. So if I could have a broader option of food that would be vegan based, similar to these foods, I would absolutely jump on that train. I think that it would be a healthier option for somebody like myself.
You made a good point there. It's either they modify the organism to be more pest resistant and less susceptible to changing climate or too much water or not enough water. You either
Right.
modify the corn to be able to handle it, or you keep it organic and then it needs all these additional things like
Chemicals. Yeah.
sprays or whatever. And even like I live close to sort of an agricultural community, and I've talked to people that are organic farmers and they laugh. They're like, it's a joke. It's certain things that you do to your farm to be organic certified. You're not spraying your crops, but the guy in the field next door is, and you don't think there's such a thing as wind, and they don't share the
Yeah.
same water table.
Yeah.
It's a joke. The only way you're going to have clean food is to eliminate sprays, hands down. And there are some genetic and bio-friendly sprays and things that can be
Yeah.
used, introducing like like ladybugs to kill aphids, so you don't have to spray. You're using kind of nature against nature.
Right.
But I think that can get out of hand too if you do that wrong. Like we're still playing God a little bit. No.
A lot of it. That's actually, this is a really interesting implication here for me. So Monsanto had a big issue, back in the 90s and stuff like that, where there were farmers were being, demolished. Their businesses were being demolished by Monsanto because their seeds were blowing into the farmers, like their land, into their crops, and those seeds will be property of Monsanto. So Monsanto would claim, "Hey, now this is our property because our
Yeah.
seeds are on there," and they were suicide seeds as well. So when they first were sprouted, they died. They would no longer produce any more seeds. It was a very predatory and honestly sick thing that Monsanto did. Monsanto, please don't come after me and my family. But they did that through these, editing the genes of these plants as well. There are ethical implications that could be for the bad. But when I think about anything that could change or revolutionize society in any way, I think that there are good ways to use it and there are bad ways to use it. Honestly, it's up to us to kind of push for what we want for these technologies and these sciences to be used for, instead of them being imposed on us and them just happening, or somehow, just resisting these kinds of technologies and sciences. I think we need to push for more openness about what's being done with them, in the labs, the data being presented in a user friendly way that we can understand, instead of it being hidden behind some kind of a scientific paper that nobody understands.
Yeah, like in theory, it's a good thing, right? They're going to engineer a crop that produces more, bigger yields. Farmers can be more sustainable now and better
Right.
nutritional value. But essentially, the DNA is traceable to Monsanto. The only reason
Right.
Roundup works is because those organisms have been modified not to react to it. So you could spray an entire field of corn with Roundup, it will kill everything except the corn because the corn has been modified. So it's a good and a bad thing at the same time.
Right.
But to your
Yeah.
point, if we don't moderate or keep track of these companies and what they're actually doing, it can go all bad. I mean, what if all native species of food die out? And now, if you want to eat, you got to buy your
You
seeds
have
from
to genetic.
Monsanto. And
Yeah.
you know what I
Mm,
mean? Like,
yeah.
monopoly on nature is never a good idea. And Big Pharma
Yeah.
does it, and the agricultural world is trying to find their own ways around it. But it's not the big bad scary monster. The idea of GMO and other
Right.
companies are marketing the hell out of non-GMO and this and that.
Right.
It's not the GMO, it's the issue. It's everything else that goes with it. The politics, the
Our
other
system.
farmers can't
Yeah.
keep up.
Yeah.
Maybe the Roundup kills their crops because they're not GMO. Whereas,
Right.
so again,
Or
there's a lot of games being played, monopolies and stuff like that. And when you're dealing with food supply, that's a big issue, right?
yeah. On a final note, to my point on this, I don't want to take too much of your time here, but I think that you'll hear there's a repeated theme that you will hear, especially from me, but from us. I think from us both, we understand that the systems that we live under today are the reasons why we have the issues we have, not the sciences. So when you're thinking about these issues, I really hope that people, if you're listening to us now, don't think that the science is the problem. The system that perpetuates these issues, the misuse of these sciences, is the problem.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I really want to, you know,
Well, yeah,
get
I
there.
mean, you've got water, H2O, and you got hydrogen peroxide, H2O2.
Mhm.
Don't get mad at the scientists if you drink a bottle of peroxide and it eats your insides, like nature and science is what it is.
Yeah.
You have to have common sense and a healthy respect for it to use it for what it's made for,
It'd
and
be
you
like
can,
it'd be like if somebody was like, "Yeah, I'm starting a company where we make, hydrogen peroxide, and we instead of putting it on cuts and things like that, we you drink it." And you're like,
yeah,
"Hey, that science behind peroxide is evil." No, the company using it for you to drink is evil. You
that's right.
probably shouldn't drink that.
That's
That's
exactly.
that's how I feel about all this stuff.
And at a time where we need science's help more than ever, we need to have a healthy respect for science, keep those
Yeah,
people strict to the scientific method. But that's where, like I said, all the hammer and nail inventions are done. There's
they're
nothing
done.
easy that we're just going to think up in a dream or in our basements anymore, right? We need to get creative. We have major waste issues and all the rest. And maybe
Yeah,
too much has already been done. The damage has been done. We don't know. But if we put our heads together and, we like to have a positive outlook on things, it could be all
100%.
doom and gloom, but doesn't have to be. If
Doesn't
we
have to be.
straighten up, we can actually, improve and use what we've learned. And we talk about food. Another way is with fertilizer. So this is a company that's called Prove N Fertilizer. People think, what's the big deal? Well, essentially, what this does is it replaces 40 pounds per acre of synthetic fertilizer. So you use less of it. So it's going to save you money. The microbes that are in this fertilizer have sort of a better nitrogen production. So it's a better source, it's more easily absorbed. And then obviously the end result being healthier crops, more nutritional value, faster and larger yields. So it delivers 11% more nitrogen and 10% more biomass. So you're going to get a
Yeah.
10% bigger yield, more nitrogen uptake, which also helps preserve the soil in subsequent. You'll see in some farms, they'll grow corn one year, the next year it's just hay. Because if you keep growing corn out of that same plot of land, you're going to wind up with sand. All the organic nutrients get leached out. You get erosion. It's a big problem. So they rotate their crops. This essentially replenishes the soil, gives you a bigger yield. Now you don't
Mm.
need twice as much acreage to grow that same amount of crops. So I think that's a positive but again, what if those organisms do something bad that we don't know about yet,
Yeah.
right? This is still, what do
Well,
you think on
that
the
makes that
whole?
that makes me think of two things, man. And this is awesome, by the way. I love this. I love what you've done with these slides. So the thing that I think about when it is like vertical farms, first of all, why don't we use vertical farms more universally? Like the idea that we're depending on the ever changing climate, and the ever changing weather itself in areas that sometimes are you mentioned about plots of land that cannot be they cannot have crops built because it'll drain the nutrients out of the soil. Well, why not just create vertical farms literally everywhere? Plant any kind of food that you could possibly want. Make it more of a localized farming situation. You could of course we would employ a lot more people because people could work in these vertical farms within a certain area or region, in order to provide food sustenance for people in those regions. So it just doesn't make sense to me that we're relying on traditional farming when we can clearly outdo. I mean, with the technology we have today and the science we understand, we can outdo all that. We don't. The idea that there's droughts it just seems really weird to me. That there's ever even things such as drought today, given what technologies we have. But we'll talk about that some other time. And the other thing that I think about is, this idea about increasing the production of a food source. If you're able to do that, then you could essentially provide for, if you're yielding more or producing more of any of these foods or food sources, you could provide food for a lot more people without while simultaneously reducing the cost. Which again, these are the kind of things that you think about when you think about how society is moving to a future where hopefully, these things are being used versus only being hyper marginalized and not even talked about. I mean, again, you talk about the information that's out there. Synthetic biology is not a very rich content, heavy topic. Google it. See if you can find something.
Yeah.
Hit up YouTube.
We
Good
learned the
luck.
hard way.
It's like, what? Where do you have to really, really dig? And most of it, I mean, I got a lot of information from the books and a lot and these intellectual podcasts. So I think that it's great that we're having this conversation with you guys because again, I wouldn't have even known about some of this stuff without having done this
Yeah.
research.
And it's one thing to say we want to improve our current state. We want to get like better yields and, more healthy stuff. But what about the waste that we create?
Yeah,
Pollution, plastics. That's
right.
the biggest issue with the oil and gas industry. It's not so much cars burning gasoline, it's the petrochemical business, which unfortunately is in everything. Even if you get rid of gasoline powered cars, we cannot live currently without oil. And a lot of that produces waste that can't be recycled are only partially recycled. And, a lot of people recycle everything. They feel like they're helping the environment. Most of the stuff that you recycle actually gets thrown in the trash at the recycling place. There's
Yeah,
only so certain types of PET, plastic, polyethylene that can be reused. Not everything that you throw in there. Like, for example, if you get a juice box, a little Tetra Pak, that's recyclable, but the plastic cellophane wrapper on the straw is not. So, it's not all recyclable. And I have a couple slides coming up here on can we replace plastics with biodegradable sources? That
this is
doesn't
cool.
mean getting a paper straw at Starbucks, which by the way, I just want to put this out there. I respect any company that's going away from plastic straws. You see
Right.
them stuck in the noses of turtles and things like that. But if you're
Yeah.
going to make me drink out of a paper straw, why are you still giving me my coffee in a plastic cup? So I got to use a
Kinda,
paper
yeah.
straw, but you're giving me my iced latte in a plastic cup? Come on. Like there's ways around that. You can use like cellulose fiber, which comes from corn. You can make synthetic plastics and there's even sugars that can be
I
turned
mean,
into that.
hemp is a really abundant material that
Yeah.
you can use for like so many different things. You can make a lot of things with hemp, but there's a lot of interesting laws against using hemp for different products, especially in
Yeah.
the US. So
Fair enough. And as we mentioned plastics, here's something called hyaline film. So basically, this can be used in screens, electronics. This is a naturally, I believe it involves that same cellulose production that plants can make. But basically, it's being used in the world of electronics, right? Flexible circuits, printable electronics, display touch sensors. So you don't necessarily need, the gold. You don't need the elements, the silica to make microchips to produce a screen where it is literally engineered in a biological way, right? And that's very cool
yeah.
moving forward. We are tech heavy. We both have the same phone now. And, you
Same
know,
phone.
if this was made out of cellulose fiber, it would be recyclable at some point, but none of
Yeah.
this is recyclable in its current state.
No, no. And you can use it.
Recyclable, yes, you could sell it. There is a secondhand phone market. So that's repurposing, or, it's a whole other sort of private market of just trading.
Yeah.
It's like used cars, but you're not recycling it. It's still not dealing with what happens in the end. And that's where
No.
our big issue is.
Yeah, you said something earlier about oh man, I don't want to misquote you now because we just went over a couple things. Let me think about how man, what did you say? Oh my gosh. First brain fart of the day. Um man, it had to do with the I can't think of it now. I'm gonna have to take this brain
Was it
fart.
the circuits, the gold and the microchips and all that stuff, silica?
So yeah, so Nvidia, thank you for that. For what Nvidia is building new technologies that can help with essentially the simulations that we talked about a couple episodes ago, quantum computing, where they can literally simulate any kind of solar flares,
Right.
tidal waves, weather predictions for 100 years, any kind of thing that you can imagine in terms of creating new technologies. For example, like this piece of technology you're talking about now, these developed, they can simulate it before they have to create it, and they can simulate any kind of alternative energies that they want to, or any kind of alternative production methods that they want to. And I think that when you mentioned earlier, that's it. You mentioned earlier about the end of building a new blender. The future is not building a new blender. The future is essentially creating ideas that AI can make them reality for you. You
Right.
can literally ask it to create a material that's sustainable, that's renewable, that doesn't have any kind of environmental impact, and it can do it instantly.
And it
And
can
that's
tell
what
you which ones will fail to not waste your time and resources on
yeah,
because they run
yeah,
all the Yeah,
They
that's good.
simulate it. It's pretty cool stuff. So
And so we've been talking about electronics, we did fertilizer, let's talk about medicine. So there is this product called Kimraya. So
Kim,
they basically, this is human T cells. This is for people that have blood cancer or any other thing where T cell sort of introducing new T cells into your body would help.
yeah, so
So
think Resident Evil,
basically,
right?
what's that?
Think Resident Evil, the T virus.
Exactly. So,
Just kidding.
and we covered this a little bit in gene editing and things like that, more so in a way of a gene therapy to replace missing genes. But essentially, this people that have a T cell, they either need to get it from a donor or they don't get it at all because right now gene editing is not legal, so you cannot, modify other cells to make them T cells as of current. But in this
Mm,
process, they will collect some of your own blood, take whatever T cells you have out. This Kimraya using synthetic biology will increase the T cell count. I don't know if it's just a healthy solution that these things like to grow in or what, but it will make more T cells because obviously, if you're T cell deficient, you don't have enough. So simply taking it from a
oh,
donor isn't going to
yeah,
do anything because you're deficient. So they use this product to increase your T cell, and then once they kind of get reprogrammed to target cancer, they put a chimeric antigen receptor. Basically, it means they're targeting where these T cells need to go. They're telling it that this is for blood cancer. These are the cells you want to seek out. And then in the end, they're injected back into that donor as now a boosted thing. So there's no genetic issue because they are your own T cells. There's no rejection or things like that. But essentially, using synthetic biology to increase the count of something or the potency
yeah,
of something is
yeah,
leading to, and again, because gene editing is not legal ethically in North America, science isn't stopping. They're saying, okay, well, is there a way we can kind of go around that, still remain legal, but still give people the help that we know these therapies, and eventually it will be legal because we won't have a choice. There will be so many diseases we will have to use it. But it's good to see these guys thinking outside the box, guys and gals, I should say, thinking
yeah,
outside the box and not letting a wall say, oh, well, no more gene research because, we can't modify them. Well, what if we could amplify them instead? There's other applications for that. Um,
yeah,
your thoughts on the whole medicine
yeah.
and
So
gene
I
editing?
there's something else I wanted to mention, and I had to type this in so I didn't forget it. So, what would be the implications or the potential manifestations of variations through generations, right? So if you pass that down, let's say they give you some kind of gene editing, whatever it may be, whether it be this T cells or whether it be any kind of gene editing for even in crops, what happens several generations down the line? What happens? And I wonder. I think that the fear and the hesitation to put this into a more broader application for the society are that we don't know what the implications are 10 generations from today. What happens when your great grandkids have come out and there's a genetic anomaly. I mean, evolution, for example, they believe had genetic anomalies that were unexpected. But when you're toying around with you're toying around with the genetics of people intentionally, who knows what anomalies might sprout out of nowhere,
Yeah.
like changing viruses through passing from one person to the next.
The big thing is there's genetic modifying that doesn't affect what they call the germ line. The germ
You
line is
mentioned,
what gets passed on to every
yep,
subsequent generation. So the
yep,
germ line is where the issue is because if you get it wrong, now it's out there. But
mhm,
again, CRISPR being literally just instructions that are implanted into an organism, it can also be programmed to stop after so many copies as well. Or it could be like a car with a stuck gas pedal that it goes crazy. But in the world of plants, we can engineer many generations faster than they would
right,
exist in
right,
natural nature, right? With
yep,
cloning, and you can
yep,
literally have one plant, you could have 50 generations and it wouldn't take 50 lifetimes to do it. So we can kind of map out, hey, what would this look like in 10, 20, 30, 50 generations to eliminate some of that risk. But I know any experiments that they've done, like with like rats on Nantucket Island,
fruit flies,
genetically modifying them, they're doing them in small areas where if it does go wrong, it doesn't have global implications. You got to start somewhere. You got to test the waters. So there's a lot you can do in a lab before you even start like playing with it in real nature. And I think right now there is a healthy concern that we don't want to mess with something we don't know. I don't see it being kind of haphazardly. Not in North America anyway. Other parts of the world, who
They're
knows?
probably
And yeah, they're like doing stuff in Russia and Asia that's like out of movies that we
they
probably
probably
don't
have
know
like
about.
horsemen running around, freaking Centauro and Chimera, all flying around, flying freaking dog birds or something like that. Who
Yeah.
knows, man?
All that becomes possible with gene editing, right? And again, this is more synthetic biology, not because gene editing is very specific in its purpose. This is, can we modify other organisms just like the yogurt?
Yeah,
Can we make a better tasting yogurt by using these bacterial cells instead of these bacterial cells, right?
yeah, yeah.
Another one that I thought was super cool. So these are soybean plants. Now, when you go to the grocery store and you look at oils, we all know that there's good oils and bad oils. You got vegetable oil, canola oil, olive
Yeah,
oil,
saturated,
avocado,
unsaturated fats
coconut.
are
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's the difference between what makes it a good or a not so good is the saturated fats, the trans fats. So
Mm,
I've never seen soybean oil on the shelf, and I don't even think they sell it. Reason being, soybean oil is very high in omega 3 and omega 6, but it's also extremely high in trans fats. Up to a quarter of it is like straight cholesterol. So, what they can do with this company is called Calino, and they basically can create what's called a high oleic soybean oil. So, oils like olive oil, avocado oil, very healthy. They are high. They are considered oleic oils. So, if you could somehow modify that soybean where it's no longer producing the cholesterol based oils, but the healthy, good fats, now you have the best of both worlds. You have something that's cheap and easy to grow, it's abundant. The byproduct of the oil, the pulp, can still be used for other things as well. And you would effectively be able to have a healthy oil out of what is currently a non-healthy oil. So it's not always like the world is going to end if we put this out there, but it does involve modifying because the existing product does not do that. So this is all about modifying.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned about it. There are sometimes I do pull like ketchup or some kind of product where it says this has been genetically modified. And I wonder what that really mean like what that means because if it is illegal in the US then they're still doing it.
Well,
Or
it's
is there some
again
kind of a
GMO. Monsanto is GMO. Since the 80s, we have been genetically modifying. The
yeah,
issue is using CRISPR to genetically enhance. So now I can have a baby that's faster, stronger, smarter than yours, and your kid may be unable to compete against mine in 30 years' time, but mine was synthetically enhanced, yours was not. Is that fair? That's where the ethical implications come in the world of people. Once it goes into people, we start asking these big
yeah,
questions, but we
yeah.
should have been asking them all the way along because it's already happened in the food world for almost 40 years.
Yeah, but I will say, in defense of fixing world hunger, there are some really big benefits and implications to helping out poor nations, third world countries, people that are starving. I would prefer that they had something than die from nothing. Like there's a lot of, I mean, the poverty rate for children in the world is sickening. It's depressing. It's not right. I think that at the very least, if they're using it in other countries, they should be using it. We shouldn't have world hunger. There shouldn't
Yeah.
be. Even at the risk of not knowing what the potential is. I'm not saying like let's just test it out on poor people. What I am saying though is that if there is something that we think is safe based off of data that suggests that it is and that it could be, given that we can simulate generations of these organisms being produced in a short time, then I think we should apply that to nations that need it, versus keeping it from nations entirely, but using it for the benefit of certain corporations in certain situations. Because somebody's already benefiting from this, and it ain't most of us.
And
That
again,
should
it's one thing if you're modifying something to take out another species or to have major implications, but in the video we mentioned, or I think it was just after we talked about rice and how it doesn't naturally have vitamin A.
right, right,
Most of the starving countries in the world do have access to rice. That is the staple. So just adding beta carotene to a grass seed can, deal with mineral
yeah,
deficiency, right? So I don't think that is unethical if, as long as the
no,
people know and there is a benefit and we know that that is the extent of the modification, that's all that's been changed, it's not going to go bad. I mean, there's always inherent risk, but there's inherent risk with everything. You
yep.
get vaccinated, there could be a risk with that. You go for a procedure, even if it's a normal mundane whatever. My father gets his pacemaker battery changed every 10 years. They still got to make him sign the paper, be like, just so you know, like,
If you die,
you
oh man,
die, we
yeah,
got to
yeah,
stop your
yeah,
heart. We might not get it started again. Like, so there is nothing without some inherent risk, but it's the risk reward calculation.
Right.
And, there's a way to do it without, you know, destroying the planet. Again, it might just be something in terms of enhancing the mineral content or the nutritional value of something, and if that alone helps towards the world hunger issue, then I think we should look at it.
I think so too. I think so
So
too.
I want to talk about now something a little deeper in terms of its scope: rubber and plastics. So as we know right now, these are rubber is a natural product, but it's mixed with petrochemicals, vulcanized, and turned into car tires. The waste from car tires is significant. Drive through any small town in America, and you got more used car tires than you know what to do with. And it's a problem. It's not going away. You can't burn them. I know companies have turned them into like little pellets and then melted them into like picnic benches and stuff like that. But the
Yeah.
recycling limitations of rubber are challenging. There's only so much you can do. Plus, there's many things in a rubber tire. There's steel cables, there's nylons, there's a bunch of stuff. So they're using synthetic biology to create naturally sort of replicating rubber. So isoprene is something that comes out of the petrochemical world. It's used in making rubber, but there's a
Mm,
way that they can use an enzyme to naturally synthesize this isoprene. So now you don't need oil to make rubber. You can use something that is biodegradable in its essence. Therefore, the end
right.
product is biodegradable as well. So you don't we could use less oil and burn less and produce less CO2, but it deals with that waste issue as well. It's a double-headed sword now. You're not just making something that's better and more friendly to engineer and produce. You're dealing
Right.
with the issue of in 5 years when these tires are scrap, what happens to them then? And I like that that's double. Have you seen things like this in your research where they have a multi-purpose?
That yeah. So from what I from what I remember, at least especially on TikTok, TikTok was actually a pretty good resource for looking at different like how they can turn a certain thing like, for example, algae into a multi-purpose tool
Yeah,
for climate change or for things that are affecting like when you have an oil spill in the ocean, they can help clean up the ocean with by just altering the genes of certain things to be able to consume the oil and
yeah.
then biodegrade. There's a lot of different applications for changing certain things to make them have multiple applications. I think that the problem that I see, at least with this, is getting it in front of people's eyes, the public's eyes, so they can push for certain things like that to be done. Right now, I know that it's a growing topic. By the way, this isn't something that's new. It's not something that's new. This has been going on for decades. However, and I mentioned this earlier, usually the big corporations are using it for their own profit. They're not using it for things like we're talking about, like biodegrading oil spills, or anything like, or sucking up, like eating plastics, using certain different organisms to eat plastics. I think they genetically modified. I can't remember what it was. They genetically modified a bug or something like that to eat plastic in the ocean, and they would just die, and there would be no environmental implications at all. Yet they're not using it on a broad scale because of regulations. Now, the
Yeah.
funny thing to me is that regulations are affecting our ability to help the environment um, negatively, but they're not being used to stop things from happening negatively to the environment. I don't quite understand the backwards nature of our society sometimes. I don't get
Well,
it.
do you think that the oil and gas companies want any of this to get out there? That within your own ability, within a lab that you could house in something the size of your garage, you no longer need ExxonMobil? Like that is a tough pill to
Oh
swallow
yeah.
for $1 trillion business.
Well,
Like
when we
it's
get
not
into
going
the
to happen.
alternative energy, yeah, when we get into the alternative energy side, we'll talk about
Yeah,
there's some really interesting topics to bring up there. But when it comes to synthetic biology, I have a feeling, and I heard someone say this during in a podcast that they're like, one day we'll be able to do things like, and this is ridiculous, but there are people who will do it. Um, if you want to be bioluminescent, you can have a bioluminescent like fingernails, where
yeah,
your fingernails will just grow and they'll just be the only thing that they'll glow. They'll glow.
yeah.
Um, or if you want to have like, I don't know, you want to be able to conduct electricity somehow like an eel, you'd literally be able to do that by genetically modify. I don't know why people would do this, but the implication was that way into the future, you'll be able to literally have any kind of genetic trait from any other organism you want to. We will essentially be chimera,
We will
at
be
will.
the octopus of the future.
The octopi.
But good point there, and we mentioned that in our CRISPR gene editing episode, guys biohacking, stuff like that. The people that are doing
Yeah,
these gene edits, they use bioluminescence to prove that it actually works. So if you're into that
yeah.
kind of thing, go through our video library here and check out CRISPR gene editing because it was interesting. But before we go to our break, you mentioned algae, and I've got a cool video clip here on an algae tree. Now, it's not a real tree, it's a machine, but essentially it's using algae to do the same thing that a tree would. So take a look.
Trees turn pollution into oxygen. They run on solar energy paired with algae microorganisms that catch gases and particles from polluted air. The pollution acts as a food source, and the more that's eaten, the more the microalgae grows and photosynthesizes CO2 into fresh oxygen. One algae purifier is equivalent to 368 eucalyptus trees filtering air, which makes this invention a quick solution for areas deprived of greenery or even inside living spaces. The process generates a byproduct of microalgae waste that can produce biofuels and biofertilizers. Replanting decimated forest land takes time, so what do you think about helping nature a little with these artificial lungs?
Oh man, that reminds me of Neri Oxman. Remember,
Yeah.
I really desperately want to get her onto the show sometime. She uses like silkworms to create structures instead of using certain material that we extract from the earth or we dig up or whatever. Um, she uses natural processes like silkworms and like organic material to create structures. Now, when you couple that kind of idea with synthetic biology, and not just with the application of extracting the CO2 from the air, but also in terms of building or creating structures that are organic instead of and that don't have any kind of environmental impact versus building like cutting down trees and building houses with them, we can create something that grows. Our homes can grow, our clothes can grow, our everything that we use can be grown instead of made in a factory somewhere. That that sounds like a really interesting future to me. I mean, again, you can imagine, right? Going to the store and be like, I like this clothes, and then they're like, okay, it'll be ready in a week, and they'll just grow it. It doesn't have cost because all the only cost is it is the the facility that it grows in, but essentially it's just growing. It's growing material instead of using it.
Yeah, at a molecular level, the difference between nylon and cellulose, which is natural product, it's not that much different. We just need fibers. Could be
Yeah,
cotton, could be hemp, like you mentioned earlier,
whatever. Yeah,
anything. It's just that it's always been cheap and easy to produce. That's why they've gone the petrochemical way, right? We've enabled
yeah.
it to go that way. Nobody wants to spend $80 on a t-shirt. Well, some people spend $400 on a
Yeah,
t-shirt,
I was
but
gonna. No.
but now we have an issue of like this disposable clothing world. The clothes don't biodegrade, and we'll deal with this at a future episode. But if you want to talk about forever chemicals, things like BPAs and stuff like that,
Yeah,
biphenyl alkaloids or something like that, they basically get into your body and never ever get out. You cannot purge them. They're like the lead of the plastic world.
yeah,
We're getting those fibers, and those things break down into fibers that are smaller than a human hair. We know there's plastic in the ocean and it breaks down into little tiny pellets. What about things you can only see under a microscope? They're still there. They still get eaten by plankton. We inhale these fibers. Like
mm,
the implications of that, and even like in your carpet, just walking back and forth, those fibers get in the air,
yep,
you breathe them. They don't come out of your body after. So there's a lot more to it than, just oil and gas. It's the reasons we've used oil and gas and the reasons that it was a benefit to those companies need to change. We need to change our priorities to say that this is no longer acceptable because of what's going to happen. I mean, we already see the effect of that, and we need to use this stuff
yeah.
moving forward. And otherwise, it's just talk. Yeah, we're going to save the planet. Well, it starts with really thinking outside the box.
Yeah, and and on a final note before our break here, I want to say we're not Greta Thunberg. I know that we are like sitting here advocating for science and technologies that could help revolutionize the civilization as we know it, but I feel like that's more like being a futurist versus an environmentalist. I just want to live in a future where things are cool, man. Like I want to live in a future where Michio Kaku talks about in his physics of the impossible. I want to live in a future where we have a type 1 civilization, and I mentioned this before, where we're using all the resources of the planet instead of lousing them up. We're using the natural process of our planet to be more symbiotic and have a more symbiotic relationship with our planet. That's what I just feel like. We have all these illnesses and sicknesses and ailments, cancers and tumors, and all these things an aberration of the way that we've structured society to be. Yet we're fighting against progress scientifically and technologically. We
Yeah.
gotta. I hope that what we're doing is we're giving a better idea about how these technologies can be used, and how we should view these things so that people can be more advocates for a better future, a cooler one, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't begrudge anybody making money. If you think that these industries are just going to disappear or they're going to get into a new area of technology without some kind of benefit, it's not going to happen. So I don't begrudge some company making $30 billion profit, but
Yeah,
you
as
can
long as
make
we're benefiting.
29.5 billion and make sure you're not screwing the planet for our kids and their kids. Like there is profit and there is greed. And when you get greedy, that's when you start throwing caution to the wind. That's when you have like plastics factories in the States literally pouring toxic waste into the water supply. And the residents had no choice on these companies getting these tax breaks. And we're going to build a $5 billion plastic factory in the middle of nowhere. It's not their fault. So I don't begrudge companies making money. If there isn't a profit to be had, no one's going to spend the money to develop these technologies that we need for our everyday lives. So, but there needs to be a focus on what is fair and reasonable profit and what are you allowed to do in your wake? Are you allowed to just
Mm.
come in and destroy a bunch of stuff and then just walk away unscathed? And I think there's a lot, I don't want to say corruption, but there's a lot in the way of favors and big companies that get things overlooked. I mean, for a while in Canada, I don't even know if you still can, but they came out with this, like these carbon credits where you could
Mm.
only produce so much waste. But if you were going over your limit, you could just buy more carbon credits from another company that wasn't using their full
What?
allocation. Like that's not going to work. That's just enabling them to keep doing what they're doing. It's cheaper to buy the credits than retool the
Yeah,
factory. That doesn't work moving forward.
it
So
sounds like I sound like we're going towards an idiocracy, if anything. It's like-
yeah, exactly. So we'll take our halfway break, our 5-minute break here, and we'll see everybody back. Refill those coffees. We'll see you guys back
yeah.
here in 5. We're going to get into the world of renewable energies. So stick with us. And we are back with the second half of Quantum Ladder Podcast. Good chatting with you again, as always, Marquise. Love doing these shows with you, buddy. It's been
Yeah,
interesting.
man. It's always fun. I always have like so many things to talk about, and I feel like I never have enough time to talk about them, especially when I can only talk about them with you here. So it's
That's
like
right. That's right.
cram it
We
all
just
into
have to
2
do more
hours.
shows, and everybody seems to be enjoying them. And again, thank you everybody for your support. Shouts out to Scott Rosen, our newest Quantum Club member. And
Yeah,
for
man.
anybody who doesn't know, we record another episode at the end of these that's available through our Patreon channel. The link's in our description, but as little as $5 a month, you can support our show. We're not running any commercials right now. Hopefully, you guys notice that. We're not monetizing, but it is expensive to do this at a somewhat high level. This is expensive. This is
Yeah,
expensive. Your stuff's
yeah,
expensive.
yeah.
It all adds up. So thank you for your support, and shouts out to everybody who is helping and contributing along the way. So let's get into the world of renewable energy. As I mentioned earlier, I had some studio time this week, Marquise. So I've taken
Yeah,
your
you did.
expertise and made a little video here. This is only a minute and a half on renewable energy. And then we've got, for the balance of this show, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 7 videos to break down renewable energies, what's happening. And this is where it gets exciting because these are all realistic options. They're currently happening and they could make a big difference. So, but if you're not familiar with renewable energies, take a look. Welcome to a future where energy isn't just a commodity, but a force that harmonizes with the world around us. We're exploring the cutting-edge realm of renewable energies, a tangible force reshaping the way we power our lives. When most people think of renewable energy, they usually think of the giants of the energy sector, wind turbines and solar panels. These technologies aren't just about being green, they're about reshaping the entire energy grid. Imagine cities lit up not just by lights, but by the promise of a sustainable future instead. Renewable energy is a multifaceted solution. The field of bioenergy now takes the spotlight, turning organic waste into power. Biomass and biofuels are transforming what we once considered garbage into valuable energy resources. Scientists are tinkering at the molecular level, engineering microorganisms to produce biofuels efficiently. It's not science fiction, it's science in action, driving a biological revolution in our quest for cleaner energy. In labs across the globe, researchers are decoding the secrets of synthetic biology, creating living factories that could redefine how we produce and consume energy. This is about adapting the very building blocks of life for a sustainable future. Countries around the world are recognizing the potential of renewable sources to meet their energy needs. We hope to power our technological world without further damaging our environment. The world of renewable energy is not only a necessity, but a challenge we actually have the ability to tackle. It's not just cool science, it's the future of our sustainability that's on the line. I think the coolest thing for me dealing with sort of synthetic biology is some of these inventions have the ability not only to do a process or solve a problem, but the byproduct can be usable as well, like that algae tree. So it's going to clean pollutants out of the air, remove CO2, produce oxygen, and then the byproduct waste from that algae doing its cell reproduction, the dead, decaying bacteria,
Yeah,
can be
yeah.
used for biofuel. Like that's as good as it gets, really. You're not producing a waste, you're using it and then saying, hey, we can still use this again. And the benefits go from there. And one of
Yeah.
those things in the clip you saw would look like little gray logs popping out. That's what they call biomass engineering. Essentially, that's garbage, which we have a huge problem with, using garbage and processing it to create fuel that is not oil and
Doesn't
gas.
hurt to
And
yeah.
this basically how it works. Looks confusing, but it's not. On the left, you've got your recycling.
Right.
Basically, it's an incinerator. They're going to burn this stuff, turn it into ash. The heat from that powers steam generators. They power turbines. They create electricity. Or you can compress that end product into those little nuggets like we saw. And
Yep.
essentially that's that's how they get from garbage to usable electricity. And then there's no additional waste, thereafter, right? So and then you can use it for, this is biodiesel. So the CO2 coming off of something, i.e. burning garbage, it goes into a probiotic reactor. Again, they use algae and organisms to break this down. The byproduct and light, of course, because algae is photosynthesis based, so it needs light. Byproduct would be oxygen, biofuel, biodiesel, livestock
Right.
feed, fertilizer, everything else. So I think that is where we need to focus in terms of clean, because we're not only doing something, but we're fixing something and we're not producing more waste.
Yeah, and I actually have some stats to talk about about this type of thing, this biofuel, sustainable biofuel. So the U.S. Energy Information Administration says that biofuel it made up of 5% of total U.S. transportation fuel consumption in 2021. Now, that's obviously nothing. That's like a little drop in the bucket compared to what fossil fuels are using right now. But here's where things get really interesting because the global biofuel production is expected to hit about around 165 billion liters by 2024. That's next year. So we're right around the corner from dramatically increasing those biofuels. Hopefully, because that's a lot of power. I mean, that's a lot of good power. We're literally leveling up that biofuel game, if you will. And there's another stat that I wanted to bring up. So some of these biofuels are reducing greenhouse gas emissions by up to 86% compared to traditional gasoline. So, again, it's like you choose a green path instead of going, down these, where the choices actually matter. In my opinion, I think that these choices matter to human civilization versus just the economic value of a certain market.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of my perspective. I figured those two stats were pretty interesting for me anyway. For me.
Yeah, and the whole idea with biofuel is that out of a gallon of biodiesel, you actually get more kilojoules or more,
Yeah.
burnable energy than you would out of a,
Yeah.
of a dinosaur juice, even though it's not dinosaur juice, but you know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
the old-fashioned black crude oil turned into
Right.
diesel
Right. Yeah.
versus a bio. And when biofuels first came out, a lot of people said, well, yeah, this is great. But if you look at how much corn you have to grow to produce ethanol, there's not enough land on the planet to do it, which
No.
I don't know if that's correct or not. But
I mean,
corn is already being used for human consumption, animal feed. There's only so many places you can grow corn. It takes space, a lot of water, and all that. But now there's other ways of producing biodiesel or bioethanol without using corn. They're using algae. They're using bio waste. Like here's the biodiesel food chain. So the first generation, it's things like palm, sunflower, canola, non-edible feedstock like castor beans, things like that, and then algal biomass. So they use all these things, extract oil. Then they use a process called transesterification. Transesterification, big fancy word. Essentially, you're purifying that oil, turning it into something that a combustion engine can run off of. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be growing corn. It could be growing crops that we don't have any other use for, that maybe take a lot less water, a lot less space. So the whole corn ethanol thing is out the window. And you could essentially modify every combustion engine on the
mm,
planet for only a couple $100 per vehicle. So again, we're going to get into electric cars and stuff like that. It is a myth that electric cars will save the planet. We will show you why. But in essence, if you wanted something that's faster, readily available now, and something that we could all use, the issue is the infrastructure. We don't have
yeah.
biofuel refueling tanks, especially not if you're living in a small town, which most populations are pretty spread out. Yeah, they're big city centers. But again, you also have pushback from the oil and gas sector that doesn't want any of this to happen because they don't have a monopoly like OPEC has on oil and gas.
Yeah.
So the politics end of it comes in. But kudos to some sporting. In fact, my favorite sport is Formula One racing. They've made a pledge that by 2026, every single car will have to run on sustainable biofuel.
Wow.
So that is the highest performing automotive engine on the planet. They already have electric hybrid assist and other things like that, energy recovery. So it's already a mild electric car, but the gasoline component will be full biofuel. So if Formula One cars can still perform on biofuel, your Honda Civic is going to do just fine. And it doesn't mean lithium mining and the pollution, which I have some stats on that too. They're mind boggling. But yeah, what are your thoughts on the whole biodiesel, biofuel? Do you think that that's realistic? Can we get there?
I 100. First of all, we should already be there.
Yeah, agreed.
Like the fact that there's a documentary called "Who Killed the Electric Car" in 19 that was like a 1990 thing. GM, I think we talked about it briefly. You're going to go over why electric cars are not the way, but we're not. I'm not saying electric cars are the way. I'm just saying that we had the ability to do a far better job of what electric cars are doing today. Only they killed it because it's not profitable. But the crazy thing for me is that if you think about these technologies in the long run, these fuels that could be implemented today, right now, in the long run, not only is it more sustainable, which some people care about, some people don't, because you can't think about what happens in 100 years. You can imagine what's going to happen in 100 years. But if you have kids or grandkids, you might want to start thinking about that, because if somebody told me, hey, listen, in 100 years, if you have grandkids or your kids or whatever survive for that long, who knows? They're gonna probably die miserably. It's like, what? Why? Because of the way that we're running. Or I think I'd want to change the way that things are today. So I think we could do that today. We could. There's a lot of data that talks about how, and I should have brought this, but I didn't think about it. I'm just on the fly talking about this. Everybody listening, Google what we're talking about. You can find the same information on the internet, or you can always ask AI, because they might be able to help it, but check that stuff on Google, because it's not always perfect. But they were able to completely change renewable energy in the 80s to transition our energy production to alternative energies in the 80s. That includes geothermal, tidal. All these energies could have replaced fossil fuels in the 80s. There's a guy named Jacques Fresco who did an interview on Larry King, and if you look at it, just again, YouTube Jacques Fresco, Larry King, and check that interview out. He rips the fossil fuel industry and, of course, society, the systems we have today, apart, because we could have done this literally like 50, 60 years ago. So
yeah, absolutely. And in terms of some of the renewable energies we're going to talk about here, so you've got wind power, solar, tidal energy, photovoltaics, geothermal power, wind turbines, hydro, biomass, biofuel, solar thermal energy, again, photovoltaic systems, sunlight, hydroelectricity, marine energy, concentrated solar power, even solar water heating. These are all technologies that exist that are currently being used. We're going to go through a few. I got a quick video clip here on sustainability of biofuels. Let's see what the world of TikTok has to offer this topic.
Biofuels legit? Well, fossil fuels are responsible for 75% of global emissions, mostly for energy, power, and transportation. So eliminating emissions from fuels would make a huge difference in our atmosphere. Sustainable biofuels aren't made from petroleum or other fossil fuels, but instead things like plants and waste. But not all are created equal. There's ethanol made from crops and various plant materials known as biomass, which a lot of gasoline in the US already contains. And biodiesel made from vegetable oils and animal fats, plus a bunch of others made from things like algae, hydrogen, and animal waste. While fossil fuels are finite, meaning they would run out one day, biofuels can be made sustainably from renewable feedstocks, eliminating the need for coal, oil, or gas, and can fit into infrastructure that's already designed for fuels. But unfortunately, biofuels are still burned and release emissions. According to the U.S. Department of Energy, emissions reductions range from about 19% to 86% less than fossil fuels. So decreasing emissions by, say, half is progress, but it's frankly not enough. And usually biofuels are mixed with fossil fuels, so the decrease is even less. There are other arguments against biofuels too, like the additional strain on agriculture, but ultimately, biofuels are better than petroleum and coal, but not nearly as good as truly renewable options like solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, or nuclear.
The cool thing for me is the simplicity of these molecules. If you can make ethanol, which is alcohol, that replaces gasoline, or fatty-based oils to produce biodiesel, essentially our cars are basically running on alcohol and French fryer oil anyways. We've just made them run better using the petrochemical version. Like, that's why I said, for not a lot of money, you could literally modify current vehicles as they are without reinventing everything or making everybody go all electric. And I want you to go through, I know you've got some video clips on these various technologies. Before we get into the electric car, there's a lot to the electric car that I think people don't quite realize. And I don't want to do electric car and then go back into these technologies. So you want to start with seaweed, your cool findings on seaweed?
So if you could pull up, so I don't know if you guys know what seaweed, this is a seaweed. So it's called macroalgae, which is being looked at right now as a source of biofuel. It grows really fast. We talked about how algae grows really fast using photosynthesis. Of course, it doesn't need fertilizer or fresh water, and it absorbs CO2. So we talked about that. It's pretty clear. Let's check that video out real quick, and then I'll talk about how it works, how the process works. And you can see it.
A flexible seaweed-like electricity generator that harvests wave energy. It sways like seaweed in ocean waves on the surface and underwater, and generates electricity by rubbing different materials against each other, which makes them efficient and also durable in both calm and harsh conditions. The electricity generated would mainly be used for things like ocean sensors and lights on top of buoys, which could power the Internet of Things out in the oceans, which normally have to get their batteries replaced like pretty regularly. But in the future, mass massive scaled up versions could power bigger things like lighthouses or...
And he goes
That's
on to
very
say,
cool.
yeah.
Very cool.
So essentially, it's like everything that could be powered either from the coastline out. That would be what that kind of technology could be used for. Now, it's not some of the bigger technology that can be used, some of the bigger renewable energy sources that we can use. But I found that to be really interesting because, being able to convert that without having to do anything other than allow the natural motion of the ocean, which, by the way, there are other things like tidal, which we'll talk about here after this as well. That's a pretty interesting way to generate electricity without even producing crops any further than would already grow naturally in the ocean. So or naturally on objects without having to use, like it said, fresh water or anything like that. So to me, I don't know why we're not using these technologies more prevalently. I'm just kidding. I do know why. I think we all do, but I feel like we should be doing a lot more. So right now, it is an emerging technology, but there are countries like for example, Japan and South Korea, which I didn't even know South Korea was using this seaweed renewable energy process, but they are. They're using it, of course, on their coastlines as well. But we could use it too in the U.S. Anybody can use it. Anywhere in the world this stuff can be used. So I found this to be really interesting for one of the sources of alternative energy. But the next one we have, and you have the video for that as well.
Yeah, the wave energy one. This one I found, I haven't seen the video clip, but I find this technology very interesting. In fact, the east coast of Canada, they're doing this. There's an area in the province of Nova Scotia. It's called Truro, and it has a tidal bore, which is basically a huge separation between low tide and high tide. When the tide comes in, it creates this kind of water running back against the current sort of effect. But they're using it there, and also I'm not sure if it's Sweden or Norway, but Scandinavian-based countries also have these big fluctuations in tide, and they have energy capture systems as a result of that. So let's take a look at. Go ahead. Sorry.
There are mechanisms. So you'll see in the video, but there are mechanisms that help this technology produce energy. You're thinking like, how can waves produce energy? Well, the waves themselves obviously aren't producing energy. There are mechanisms that, when interacted with by the waves, that motion, it creates friction that creates energy. But you'll see that here in a second as well. It captures the movement of the waves and turns it into electricity. But let's check this out, and then I'll talk a little bit more about this too.
Wave energy harvester that can work in almost any conditions. Its A-shaped frame that holds the line of floats and rotors that generate the electricity can open when conditions are decent, but close to protect itself when conditions are bad. So it can survive harsh weather but still continue to harvest energy, which is why...
And it just repeats itself. But by the way, that TikTok channel, it's a great TikTok channel. I've been following them now because it's got so many great talks about a lot of different topics. You'll see them a lot. You'll see him a lot on our channel, especially moving forward. But yeah, there's also tidal energy that can be used on coastlines that they can transport that energy to local areas to be used in homes. It's not just something that has to be used on the coastline, but the energy can be produced or generated from the coastline and then transported. And again, I think it's a strange process, but it actually isn't. It's not as complicated as you think. They just store it in battery cells, and then they transfer it to people's homes, and they use it in these small storage containers to produce for energy. It's renewable. You don't have to worry about. I mean, in terms of paying for it, you shouldn't even have to pay for it. The cost should be extremely low, pennies to the dollar for the consumer. So it's a pretty good alternative energy source as well.
I found a company out there that's doing a lot of these ocean-based renewable energies, and they were kind of vague because these companies don't want to give away their intellectual property. But a few other things that they're using the ocean for, just in terms of saving energy or producing new energy, was seawater air conditioning. So using the cold water from the ocean, run it through pipes with a fan or a radiator, and effectively you're just like you could be radiating hot, you could also be radiating cold. So seawater air conditioning I thought was cool. Another technology that they're using is called salinity gradient anode and cathode stacks. So they're using different saturations of salt content and setting it up like a battery with an anode, a plus and a minus, and somehow using that electrolysis with those electrolytes, you can create energy just by different gradients of this massive abundance of salt water that we have anyways. And another one was ocean thermal energy conversion. So at certain levels of the ocean, there are bands of warmer water and colder water. And just like with air, when hot and cold mix, you have this kind of vortex current. Same things happen in water. So utilizing the difference, and sometimes it's upwards of a 20-degree difference between the warm, which isn't very warm at all, but warmer than the deep cold, and just using the difference in the naturally existing currents, they can also, use the ocean to generate power and do all kinds of cool stuff. So I thought that was pretty awesome.
You're all going to see a couple more of these, but even with the ones you listed in that image you had earlier, there are we focus on one source of energy production now for the most part, which is fossil fuels. But there are so many. When you look into alternative energies, there are so many of them. It's kind of weird that it's really strange that we're not using them as much as what I think we should be, but even more importantly, as much as we can. And in terms of our I don't know, existence, we probably need to change some things now.
Well, here's to put in perspective of how dependent we are just mentally and how used to petrochemicals we are in terms of harvesting hydrogen for the things, they use it on space fuel and stuff like that and a bunch of random things. But hydrogen can be split just using electricity out of water. But for years, the way that most of the hydrogen is produced is using oil-based products.
Yeah,
We're literally using oil
Yeah.
and gas even to make hydrogen when we could just use water to make green hydrogen. So, it's not all there. And again, it's difficult because of the fact that there are monopolies. These companies are not just going to give away the golden goose, the myth of electric cars, which we'll get into as well. But, I thought that was crazy that even hydrogen, the most abundant element in the universe, we still got to use oil and gas to strip it out. Like, what is wrong with us?
Yeah, I feel like it's an idiocracy. If you've never seen the movie Idiocracy, in the future, there's a military guy who gets stuck in a hyperbolic time chamber or something like that, and the world essentially gets there's a nuclear war or some kind of war that wipes out most of humanity, and the only people that survived are pretty much dumb. They're like cavemen, big, brawly guys who are, the president is I can't think of his name, but he plays he always plays this big muscular black dude who dances with his shirt off. Think White Chicks. He's the guy that put the girl.
Oh, one of the Wayans brothers.
No, he's the dude that he put that girl in a wheelchair, and you gotta see it's and one of the Wayans brothers, he likes her, and they have a was it Britney Spears or something like that? He tries to turn him off by singing Britney Spears, but he doesn't care. He likes Britney Spears too. I think it was Britney Spears or whatever, but either way, I can't think of his Tyler. I don't know his name right now. I can't think of it, but he's the president. He's a big, muscular, dumb guy. The military dude is the smartest person in the whole world. People are so dumb he can trick them into getting his way out of whatever, But ultimately, the idea is that barbarism prevails. That we have essentially, devolved to the point where using the most inefficient, ineffective, violent, primalistic ways of living are how we have devolved into the future. And when I look at how we produce energy today, or how we do a lot of things today, it feels like we're doing them. There's like this weird counterintuitive application of these technologies instead of what seems to be the natural progression of technology. We're doing the exact opposite. I don't get it.
They've had monopolies for so long that we've kind of forgotten that they're there. So we go about our daily lives. We don't necessarily see it right in front of our face. We just think all is good. Why do we need to change all this stuff? Why do I need to, have paper straws? But the problem is this problem is long overdue and should have been dealt with years ago. And we've had the means to. But again, political campaigns are funded on contributions to these companies, right? So if you get elected president and the oil companies paid your way, how are you then going to say, hey, no more oil and gas? Like, I'm sure Kennedy got shot for less, but anyway.
Oh, well, maybe not less, but something. Yeah, there was a certain politician. I'm not going to mention his name because I don't have a political position at all. I don't think it's just ridiculous. Who made a case for essentially drilling more oil after an oil spill. He was like, we need to increase drilling because so that we can compensate for the oil spill that we just had. And I was like, did you learn nothing from what just happened? It was a massive, this is years ago, but a massive oil spill, and he comes out, come to find out he's got deep pockets. And we already know who we're filling those pockets. It's the fossil fuel industry, it's some of the shell companies, and it was Shell and it was Exxon were essentially funding him, and they've been funding him for over a decade. And I thought, how do they trick people into thinking that this is the best way to, like, forget about, sustainable, and this is all sissy stuff. This is you want to be a real man, get in your truck, fill that baby up with some diesel, and drive around and smell it all. Just so walk it in, take your dog, watch him on. Like, it's like insane to me that they've tricked people in it. And it's not people's fault that they're being tricked, because we all want something better for us in our future. But these politicians don't care about us at all. I mean, come on, guys. We got to do better. We got to look at scientists. We got to look at the sciences for answers to solutions, not politicians.
Yeah, and we all remember the big oil spills, like the Exxon Valdez off the coast of Alaska, the British Petroleum one that happened in the Gulf of Mexico 10 years ago or whatever. But there is at least one major oil spill on the planet every year, at least one. I don't know about the sizes. I didn't do the deep dive on the math on how big they are. Big enough to be considered an oil spill, not like a bucket. We're talking millions of barrels of crude leaking into the system. And we know that affects organisms at the smallest level. That's now the food chain. Everything eats something smaller than itself. You destroy the first chain, everything falls out. You know what I mean?
What was the Chernobyl, right? I haven't done a lot of research on this recently, but we all know about Chernobyl. Whenever I see something like that, I think to myself, what makes people think that nuclear is the better option for sustainable? I get that if you get it right, it is a much better technology if you get it right. But if you get it wrong, there are some pretty massive, implications for the rest of humanity. Like, it's like people are worried about AI. It's going to turn into robots and kill us all. But like nuclear, it is literally like Chernobyl. I just feel like there's some,
Well, nuclear is clean when everything is working. There is no byproduct. It's basically just heated water. It's the old boiler system that we invented 200 years ago. It's the issue is when it goes wrong. And even when it doesn't go wrong, you still have spent fuel. You have these, rods that need to be encased in concrete and buried, a mile below the surface. Yeah. It's going to sit there for the next million years decaying, whatever the half-life is of this stuff. So it's still not a good resource because there is waste in the future. I mean, Fukushima was a disaster. There's actually a very good documentary. It was made by Japanese filmmakers. It's on Netflix right now, basically about the guys that stayed there knowing it would affect their lives or probably kill them, guys that were urinating blood just from going in and out of the reactor trying to get these pressure valves open. But I mean, recently they had to release millions of liters of radioactive water back into the ocean because the pressure was building again. Like, that thing is still melting down. They're slowly disassembling that whole thing. You'll never be able to go anywhere near that place again for thousands of years. It's going to take 60 years to disassemble the place, plus the nuclear fallout, both in the air and in the water, that happened as a result. And I mean, that's essentially one tsunami, which Japan is prone for tsunamis. Many countries are. One thing that is probably going to happen again was enough to cause that chain reaction. And as soon as they had the inability to vent the pressure, temperatures start rising. That's what a meltdown effectively is you cannot cool down these rods any faster. And then you just have massive, massive issues. I think some of these guys, they said it's measured in millisieverts. What is a healthy dose of radiation? And they said like the maximum you could have in a year would be like 80 to 100 millisieverts. And these guys that were checking on this reactor, they would come back and their reading would be 800. So you had 8 years worth of radiation in 25 minutes. Man. Like many of these people died, are still dying. It's bad. Like, nuclear is only good when it's working. But even if nothing ever failed, you still have the issue of spent nuclear waste. That's thousands of years to break down,
Yeah, I feel like I always quote the idiocracy because I feel like we have such brilliant methods for alternative energy sources that we are barely utilizing, especially to its full, to what we're capable of utilizing it for. And then we're focusing and promoting some of these other energies like fusion or nuclear, and we're still using fossil fuels on a massive level, knowing that it's going to cause like catastrophic outcomes. I don't understand. I don't get it. Get it. Money is not going to, I don't think there's enough money in the world to quicken the extinction of the human race.
Yeah. And let's be honest, there's a lot of greedy men in their ancient age that don't think like that. They're capitalists through and through. They're not going to be here to deal with it in the future, right? So, in a very ignorant way, they know that it won't be their problem to solve. But I don't think we should be the century on this planet that destroyed the planet either. 4.3 billion years and we screwed up in 150 years of industrial advancements. Like,
Yeah, man.
we're
Yeah,
better than that. We're better than that. And you got a
we are.
few other technology videos
Yeah,
here
man.
on alternative energy.
Yeah. So if you could pull that video up and we'll talk about it. The vertical turbine, is that the one that we have next,
Vertical
right?
wind turbine. This sounds
Yeah. So the
cool.
vertical, yeah, it's really cool. This is like literally the maverick of wind power. But let's
Okay.
check this out and then we'll talk about it.
Wind turbine can curl up to protect itself from storms. The prototype can generate 400 watts of power during normal wind speeds and still generates power in a closed state during strong winds that would normally damage or even destroy a normal turbine. It's a unique approach to creating renewable power and could be a long-term solution, all because
And then
That was
this
pretty
is really,
crazy. I've never seen a regular turbine under high
I've-
wind literally like burning itself out.
it's actually a huge problem. And well, in terms of it happens too often. Let's put it that way. It's one thing that people that are anti-climate, activists, people who are like, they're like, let me drink my fossil fuels for breakfast kind of people. They talk about stuff like that all the time. But this is honestly, it's a perfect solution for like urban areas. Because again, it can be used in plenty of places. So you can set it up on small scales all over the place. You might see
The
some of them popping
footprint
up.
looks the footprint
There's
looks like it's less, right? It's not like I've
it's
seen one of those turbines getting delivered by like tractor trailers. Just
it's
one of
not
the
as big.
blades on your
Yeah,
typical wind turbine was like the oversized loaded trailer that they used to move like houses
yeah,
down the highway with like four support escort vehicles moving it. That was one blade off of a blade turbine. So the size isn't
yeah.
always the
Well,
best, especially if
it's
they can burn out.
100%. They do take up less space. They work literally with winds in any direction, by the way. So they don't have to they don't depend on the wind blowing in a certain direction. And you can place them a lot closer to where the power source is, or where it's being used. I'm sorry, is. So if these are like, again, these could be used for people that live in a small, maybe a neighborhood block. You can have a couple of them in a city to provide power for homes and businesses. And it
Yeah.
also takes up less energy, and there's less emissions there's a lot of less lost energy. I'm sorry, a lot of less energy lost
Yeah.
as a means for producing energy. So this is a pretty cool. I think it's a pretty cool energy solution that we're not utilizing to its full potential. For whatever reason, I don't know, but it is something that, I mean, the Obama administration, they put in legislation to kind of push by a certain, I can't remember what year it was, but they're trying to push for renewable energy sources that are specifically based off of wind over the next decade. And he put a lot of money into it, but some of that has been pulled back by um, the other people. So
Yeah.
We'll see
The cool
what
thing
happens.
about that video was it appeared that each of those little spinning cups would be on its own sort of turbine generator. A regular windmill, you have three blades spinning and you've got one main hub, but each of those little guys spinning at different rates, they're each charging their own little mechanism. So essentially, that's like having 15
Yeah, they
blades
wrote.
all spinning at different speeds, all charging in conjunction.
Yeah, and they all rotate on their own axis.
Right. Yeah.
So it's so like they are independently spinning, which is why they can be in any direction. The winds can be blown in any direction, and it will still generate power. It's pretty cool
Yeah.
stuff.
And we saw that ability to contract when it's bad weather. Same thing with those floating tidal harvesting machines, right? That's the big issue. You build a massive structure in the ocean, it's nothing to the ocean that can produce 80-foot waves. It'll just smash your stuff to bits. So having the ability to survive nature and then
Yeah,
go back when it's calm again, I think that's
yeah,
important.
yeah. These are energies that, again, some of them I didn't know. I'd never heard about a wind turbine.
Yeah.
Never saw one. Not like that anyway. Or for example, there's another one that has a perpetual motion, which
Yeah.
this is a really, really cool one. I don't know a lot about I just saw the video, and I know about some perpetual motion energy machines, but they're fringe because science, allegedly physics, according to physics, it's not possible to be able to produce energy from perpetual motion. It's not supposed to be, but there is somebody who has. Can you pull that video up, please?
But before I do, I always get a picture in my mind of, those balls swinging and the other goes. That's
Yeah, the
essentially
pendulum.
perpetual motion. Why have we not figured out an engine that works on that principle?
Well,
I've seen water pressure engines that shoot a piston.
yeah,
Like they
that's
exist.
one
They're
of
just
we can get into conspiracies on
yeah.
the Patreon side. We'll talk about that.
We'll talk about that on the after episode of this. But let's check out perpetual motion. See what we got.
Balance. And there you have it.
Watch how
What
much
do you
energy
think?
you get from that.
There is a reason why I was telling you about the surprise. But wait. Let's see what it is generating. Here I have a little light. We are going to connect it. Look how it is working. But since we don't want it to be just for one light, I've already brought the same thing that gentleman tested. Let's plug in the fan now. We already have it running. The only thing I would be missing would be to put on my flip-flops because he always wears flip-flops. I don't know.
Yeah.
This Chinese gentleman. But he really is a genius. What he did is a genius.
Pretty much it. So
That's pretty cool. I mean, a bicycle rim and some 2-liter Coke bottles and some liquid. And essentially, I mean, so that I guess you'd have to have it set just perfect so that it doesn't speed up too much or lose momentum. It would have to be calculated.
yeah.
But the guy in his
doesn't-
basement can do that. What are we doing at a technological level with, billions of government funding?
Well, there's a really interesting video. We'll watch that in the other half. But you have to give it the initial push.
Yeah.
But after the initial push, it perpetually it keeps its energy or its momentum going, which produces a small amount of energy for small uses. Now, I can't think of other than placing maybe an enclosure with that type of mechanism. Not exactly the same. We could probably engineer something much more efficient than that. But an enclosure against the wall at every outlet, and that instead of it pulling energy from, for example, the power lines, it could produce its own energy at every single outlet in your home, which would be sustainable, renewable. I mean, forget about it. It would produce its own energy. The only thing you'd have to do is over time, because of evaporation and so forth, you'd have to obviously replenish the water, or maybe or whatever the liquid is that you put inside of it, or maybe the mechanism will eventually wear out. That's a pretty good solution. I mean, it's not something that's as prevalent or as known as like the other alternative energies. It's even less known because physics says it's not supposed to be possible, and yet this is not the only example of somebody doing something like this, by the way.
And I've seen people that like live off the grid. They go and generate a water wheel like we're going to see next year,
Yeah, that's
but
really
something
cool.
very basic, which is essentially, or they'll even just dig like a channel, funnel water down, run it over a wheel that's spinning,
Yep.
and it's just charging like a couple of car batteries, and it produces a very little amount. But when that's running for hours and hours and hours constantly, there's always enough electricity in the cabin for when they go out to their cottage or whatever, and they're just running off of that natural energy that's already there. Like you don't need a lot of drain. The things that take the most amount of power are things that conduct a lot of heat. So like usually appliances like toasters, ovens, things that you're plugging into the wall and then now have to get glowing red hot. That seems to produce most of the waste, right? Or the biggest draw is with those. Like you won't blow the breaker if you plug 15 cell phones into your kitchen. But if you plug in a toaster, a microwave, a hair iron, a clothes iron, and you run them all the same time, you'll blow a 15 amp breaker, no problem, because that's way more draw than that, system can handle. So just basic electricity needs. A lot of people running a couple panels, that's good enough, or some type of hydroelectric where they're using the forces of water, or perpetual energy. Like you mentioned, you could have one of these at your house. You could essentially go there, get it started by hand, and now that thing's producing enough power to use that plug. And the only point would be the turbine.
Yeah.
Even a liquid could be like mineral oil or something that wouldn't naturally disappear over time. It wouldn't evaporate because it's not water.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things that um, they are considered fringe because physics says it's not possible, and yet it's being done.
Yeah.
And it's not the first person to do this, by the way. Again, there are other people who've been bought out by the fossil fuel industry after producing energy from magnetism somehow, or what are they, rotating magnets,
Yeah.
and other perpetual motion mechanisms that produce energy. They've been bought out. They've been bought out, or their garages mysteriously burned down with all of the data for their scientific discoveries.
Yeah.
It's. I mean, again, I don't want to get into the fringe right now. We'll talk about that in the other part, but it's pretty cool stuff.
For sure. So let's check out the water wheel here.
So let me preface this one with a story, and this is a vague memory. Many years ago, I went to an educational facility where a live-in educational facility where they teach young guys who are pretty much in bad situations. Let's put it that way. And I was in a bad situation not because I was a bad kid, just my family was in a bad situation. And there was a guy there who was this dude was he was some kind of a psychologist or sociologist who interacted with communities all over the state. And he came across this town that was using this technology we're going to see, this energy technology we're going to see here in a second. It's not really, you can call it a technology, it's a mechanism. And the town was essentially sued because they were hurting the economy of the fossil fuel industry, allegedly, and they had to get rid of that energy source so that and rely on the city's power and fossil fuels because they're using alternative energies to fuel everything. Their homes were were using this electricity. Everything was using it, and they had to get off of it because it was hurting the economy. That was essentially what they were being told. The idea that these technologies could disrupt the economy, they're probably the biggest reason for why we don't use them on a large scale. It has nothing to do with whether or not we can do it. It's because it could hurt the economy as we know it today, because we rely so heavily on fossil fuels. But let's check this out. This is really
well. You know what? Nothing hurts the economy more than everybody dying, or
I didn't want to say it, but
there's
like
a lot worse things that will affect the economy if we don't start paying attention.
Oh man!
But anyway, I'm not a green thumper. You know, I'm not somebody that's out there, eating cardboard and campaigning for, all vegan is good. Like I support everybody in their beliefs. If everybody's trying, if everybody has a positive outlook and what they're really passionate about is about helping, then that's good enough for me. I can agree to disagree. It's the utter denial, or it's the political influence that says, no, we know there's a better way, but to keep this old boys club rolling smooth, we're just going to keep doing it the way we've been doing it. That's what drives me nuts, because that's what's caused the problem,
Yeah.
All right, let's check out Water Wheel 101.
It's really cool.
So
now I know
basic.
that was
so basic.
That was quick, and I did that on purpose because I didn't want to. These videos, it's very difficult to find ones that don't have background music. That's like copyright infringement. Most people put that behind them, but that you can play that one more time.
I just removed that one. Give me 1 sec.
Oh, sorry, man. So let me kind of give you an idea of essentially what it does. All it's doing is, and you've seen this before probably with think about like a dam. The water literally just it just produces electricity by the pressure that here, let me see if I can.
I got it right here.
As the water flows, it turns that wheel. That wheel turning is producing energy inside of the source or the base of that mechanism, and it's constantly going. The water never stops running.
Yes, perpetual.
So this is perpetual. There was a large one that was in that town. It was massive. In the town that was essentially, they had to remove it because it was hurting the economy. But they do have the potential to produce a lot of energy for an entire town if it's placed at certain locations throughout, like alongside of those rivers, of those running waters.
Or you have a bunch running in tandem across the width of the river. You could be spinning 50 of those stupid things,
Yeah, and there's no environmental impact. There's no emissions of any kind.
Yeah.
It just produces energy by the flow of the water and that wheel spinning. It's phenomenal. And again, I don't think that there's a lot that needs to be said about I think we've already pretty much, belabored the point about the fact that we could be doing this, but we haven't. But it is a shame. It is a shame that we don't see a lot of these technologies littered throughout our society. I will say this much about the resistance to these things. I do think that if we were to make a true transition to these energy sources, these energy production sources, there would need to be a change in the way that we live our lives daily. Probably wouldn't be able to use as much. We wouldn't be able to consume as much. I think our consumption would have to go down in order for us to live a more sustainable lifestyle.
Yeah, or at least in the initial stage, because as anything is ramping up, it's never going to have full capacity. Yeah. It's going to produce 10% of our needs, then 20, then 30. There's a ramping up. But again, we are like just our economy, the global planet. It's a consumption-based economy where it's like a car with a stuck gas pedal. Nobody wants to let off because it's like, why do I have to suffer because of these decisions made by these massive companies? Well, we're all going to suffer. And our offspring will suffer if we don't start thinking about that. I'm not saying everybody has to wear hemp clothing and all babies have to use cloth diapers, but we need to get a little more into the way of realizing that, it's not as simplistic as it was before. Like there's not enough corn to grow biofuel. That's BS. You don't even need corn to make biofuel, right? So these technologies are there, but they involve investments of money that a lot of companies don't have, or if they took that investment, a result wouldn't be as cheap or as plentiful as the old school technology that like there's no incentive for them to do it unless they want to destroy their profit statement. And if it's a publicly traded company, that's how your stock plummets when shareholders start bailing because they know you're not producing, right? I mean, it's the way that everything runs, the way businesses run, economies run, the way countries interact with each other, the exchange of goods for services or other goods. It's not even currency, right? It's like Canada sells the US lumber and, we buy back steel and all this other stuff and vehicles are imported. So these relationships are very complicated. And these oil and gas companies don't just do oil and gas. They own other businesses. They buy companies and squash patents that, it's cheaper to just buy this guy out with his water engine than for us to retool all of our factories to stop running on gas. And as long as that's allowed to happen, which I can't see why it wouldn't be, but I mean, we're losing a lot of good proprietary information that could be used to benefit. But again, that goes down to a political level and people making noise, people getting educated. So congrats everybody for watching a show like this. Hopefully inspires you to, take in more content, but that's where it starts. You need to realize it. You need to get fired up. I'm not saying you need to go, campaign or go
lay in front of politicians' doors. Lay your body.
It won't get you anywhere anyways, but encourage these type of conversations. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing mentality. We just have to shift from using certain things to using other things. Our end, consumer needs is the goal. We want to continue to satisfy the needs of everybody on the planet, whether it's food, energy, but is there a way we can do that without destroying the planet? Yes, but it means everybody has to make a little bit less. And like I said, I'm okay if you're making 30 billion a year, but if you could do it in a clean way for 28 billion, I think that's fair. No, like you're really going to wring the neck out of the planet just for that extra increase, which won't matter in 1,000 years anyway. I just think that we need to collectively start making more noise, and that's the only way it's going to happen.
Yeah, and I will say this on myself on a final note. I want to spend more time personally looking, and this is the first time I've ever done any kind of deep dive into renewable energy. We all heard about it. We've seen the documentaries. We've read the articles. This is the first time I've done a really deep dive into it. I think that honestly, personal opinion, I would like in my life kinetic energy sources. Like there's this guy who invented, and this is not necessarily probably not a brand new invention, but he has this bicycle that you can ride it and it produces kinetic energy, of course, from the wheels turning, and you can use that to power small devices. Every day you got to use that baby. But think about the health implications, and then of course the fact that you're producing your own energy. You are the energy source. The water wheel. If you live next to a water source that has running waters, it's kinetic energy. All you're doing is and it's also fish friendly for all of you who think, I can't go fishing anymore. No, you can still go fishing. Don't worry, it's not going to kill the fish. It's fish friendly. Those kinetic sources, I think, they could be a huge help for people all over the world. So I just wish that we focus more on innovating in directions that are just cool. I think it's cool. I mean, don't you think it's cool to be able to do something like produce energy kinetically? I think it is. Maybe I'm just a stupid geek nerd like that, but
Yeah.
hopefully that will
And it's
be.
a shame that something so basic that we should all have access to, we don't for various reasons, but it doesn't mean we all have to become rocket scientists to figure out the solutions. The solutions are here. We've led the horse to the water, but you cannot force the horse to drink the water. And that's kind of like my last point I want to mention is the world of electric vehicles. Many of you know I work in the automotive business. I have for the last 22 years, managing car dealerships, franchise stores, that kind of thing. And I remember about 10 years ago, I had my own dealership, and a client of mine owned an insurance company that used to have road agents that would go and renew your auto insurance, your home insurance. They would deliver to your house. And he always bought Volkswagen Jetta diesels for his road agents. And so he came to me, and I wasn't a Volkswagen dealer. This was a used car dealership, but he wanted like 4 as close to new as I could get them Jetta diesels. And I said, like, what do you need? Oh, no, it's cheaper. I save money. I get more bang out of a gallon of diesel than I do gasoline. So I sat with him and I did the math. I said, okay, a regular Volkswagen Jetta is about 30 grand. Volkswagen Jetta diesel is 39,000. So you have a $9,000 premium. We did the math on and you get 1,000 kilometers out of a tank of diesel. You get about 650 out of a tank of gas. And there was a fuel savings and all the rest. So we did the math, but at 10 cents a liter savings, it takes a long time before you ever realize that $9,000 premium you paid up front just to get the diesel. So we did the math. He would have to keep that car 8 years and put 120,000 miles, so over 200K on the car, before he saved 1 penny on fuel.
Wow.
And he switched cars every 3 years because they get miled out because these cars never stop. They're on the road all day long. So I literally showed him that you're spending more money. The only way you would ever realize a profit is in 8 years' time from now. You've already traded that car 6 years before. And it really opened his mind that, hey, diesel wasn't going to save money or pollution either. As of late, we're all big on electric cars and everything else. So here's some stats about electric cars and lithium and everything else. Now, people kind of loosely know lithium goes into these batteries along with cobalt, nickel, a bunch of other elements. They are not necessarily clean in how they are mined. And in fact, I looked it up. So let's go back to coal, what we all see as the big bad monster, right? When you get 1 ton of coal burned for whatever purpose you're burning it for, it produces 2.8 tons of CO2 production. So that's almost 3 to 1, the bad off product versus the initial bang. Gasoline is similar. I think gasoline engines and cars are like 65% efficient. Most of it is waste, and it's not a very good efficient. I mean, natural gas is way more efficient than that. So 1 ton of coal, 2.86 tons of waste, CO2. 1 ton of lithium produces 15 tons of CO2. So it is 5 times dirtier to mine lithium than if we just kept burning coal like we've been doing for hundreds and hundreds of years. So this myth that electric cars are saving the planet is nonsense. Because the lithium itself, mining it produces 15 times more or 5 times more pollution than coal. Also, you're going to have a big used broken down battery issue of what do you do with these things? They cannot be repurposed currently. They're doing things with modular cells that can be swapped out, but that just prolongs the life of batteries that have faults in them. There will never be a day of the $500 beater car. Right now, you can go buy a 97 Cavalier for $500 that'll still drive you to your first school or your first job as a 16-year-old kid. Electric cars, have that massive price tag, an additional premium over gasoline cars, but they will depreciate to a point, just like any car. It'll depreciate to a point where replacing the battery no longer makes it worth having that car. And currently, some dealers are giving guys quotes of $30,000 for a battery. Now, you can get a battery replaced 7 to 13 grand, depending on the car, but that's not from a dealer level. That's third parties that have recycled batteries. They're running a business on saving you money for a replacement battery. But in essence, there will never be a $500 electric car, because as soon as it's worth 7 grand to replace the battery, if that thing has got tons of miles on it and it's failing health in other areas, you're going to go, that's not worth it. Like, would you spend 7 grand on that 97 Cavalier that you paid $500 for? No. So why would you do that on an electric car that doesn't run?
Yeah.
So it eliminate the ability to drive cars. Go ahead. Give me your sentiments first.
I'm sorry. I should look this up right now, but I remember reading about the statistics for and the data on this, there isn't, especially when it comes to initially, there is a massive carbon emission issue with electric vehicles because of the batteries. But from what I remember, and again, this is vague, man. Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about this till you said this. Now, there's a long-term gain, I guess, over time. Even though initially there's a excess waste, it would still be more sustainable than using coal or using fossil fuels over the long run. That's man. I wish I
That's
had
if
the,
you
the
don't
data on that.
factor in the future pollution that you're going to get from these cars. Now, long-term gain also comes with big expense, and who's going to bear the expense? Let me give you an example. So 2 years ago, I was a general
Yeah,
manager of a Cadillac dealership. Cadillac has a whole line of electric vehicles coming out. So to be Cadillac compliant, we had to have 4 high-speed charging stations. Now, it's not uncommon. You'll go to a shopping mall. They'll have a bank of like 8 of these things.
yeah,
They're faster chargers than you would have in your home. So we had to get 4 of them. So we called the city, applied for a permit. We need these chargers. City laughed at us. So where are you getting this electricity? The amount of draw you need for 4 of those, it's double what's already running through the power lines on the road your business is on. So the city literally had to go and double the electrical capacity of that street just for one business out of hundreds in the town, one
yeah.
business that wanted 4 chargers, not 40, 4. And they didn't pay for it. The city's going, we're not paying for that because nobody needs this. So our quotes initially were almost $1 million to get 4 chargers put in. And if it wasn't a massive dealership that's well funded, that had no choice but to do it, most companies would say, forget it, I'm not doing that. Now, can you imagine trying to have a fleet of trucks and say, we're going to go all electric? My friend's insurance company, he's going to spend $1 million to get 4 chargers. Come on, like that's never going to happen. And look at California. Every summer, they're this close to saying, you know what, we got to have rolling blackouts because we can't keep up with the cars and everybody running air conditioning and all the other drain in the summertime. It's literally going to go to points where you're going to have to shut off your power so that everybody else can have power. So people are saying, these electrical companies are saying, oh, there's plenty of capacity in the network and blah, 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 because not everybody's going to charge their car at the same time. Nonsense. There is not enough capacity. If a city didn't have enough capacity for one business to put in 4 charging points, what is there to say that, they have enough to do everybody? That is total nonsense. The grid doesn't exist. The infrastructure doesn't exist, and nobody wants to pay for it. And you're not going to get the gasoline companies to spend the money because they want you to keep driving internal combustion engines. So when you factor the initial premium that you pay, that loss as it depreciates, like any vehicle depreciates, the
Yeah.
replacement of batteries, the pollution caused to mine the battery, and the pollution it's going to cause to deal with that battery at the end of his life, it is not sustainable. There simply is not enough power. And most electric energy is still being done by either nuclear or coal burning factories. We're still using dirty power to make what we think is clean power to run a car that we think is clean energy. It is a myth. My personal opinion, and it's an educated opinion as somebody with 22 years in the automotive business, I think biofuels are the way to go. It requires the least amount of modification. Whether we go hydrogen cells or some other type of thing, I don't know, or just keeping the internal combustion engine and run biofuel instead. But we got a big garbage problem. We have a huge waste oil problem. The 2 of those could disappear relatively quickly, and we could eliminate the need to burn gasoline. We still need oil and gas. I don't think we'll ever be totally dependent or independent from that until it runs out. Then we don't have a choice. But it's in everything. It's in paint. It's in food packaging. Like
Toothbrushes,
literally plastics.
yeah.
Like there's certain things we can do. We mentioned plastics. I think I had a little one here on So this one here, producing biofuels and sugars, because a sugar molecule is not that far off from a petrochemical molecule. A saccharide molecule is very complicated, and they behave kind of similarly from a chemistry point of view. So instead of using ancient fossil fuels, we can generate biodegradable plastics, sugars that we can then ferment to make ethanol. It doesn't have to be as simplistic as there's not enough corn to feed, to power everybody's car. That's 20 years ago. A lot has changed since then.
Yeah.
But mark my word, the electric car, not to mention, this is what happens sometimes. Okay.
Can happen.
This vehicle locked the passenger inside the vehicle. It caught on fire. And because there isn't an actual manual lever to open the door, like most cars have power locks, there's also a manual cable as a result. For emergencies, you can manually yank that thing and get out of the car. This Tesla did not have that. So I don't know if the people survived or
Well,
not.
Tesla, first of all, Tesla's, you know, they've got a lot of issues mechanical, like the build design for them is people have said that
Very
they're
cheap, very cheap. I had a lady,
rattling.
she
Yeah.
her family bought a new Cadillac. She also picked up a brand new Tesla the same day. So we were
Yeah.
all out there looking at it. Her gas cap door was about an eighth of an inch out of whack with the body panel. I'm like, hey, it's not
Oh
a
my
gas cap, it's a
gosh.
charging cap, but
Yeah.
it's open.
Yeah.
She's
Yeah.
like, no, it's remote, it's closed. It didn't even line up flush with the car, and she spent $70,000 on that car, waited 3 years to get it.
I
So here's
mean, I
another
don't
one
get
that
you
was
could land a
actually
rocket, you could land a rocket from outer space without having reuse it, but you can't put the gas cap on the car, right? I don't.
yeah, the
What's up
build
with that,
quality is
Elon?
very
Come on, man.
cheap.
Come on, Elon.
And here's what's going to happen in the future. Now it's going to be paid by month for features. So they're already talking
Yeah.
about, well, you want to use the rear heated seats in your Tesla? That'll be a $7 a month charge. You want to use your panoramic roof? It won't work unless you pay us monthly. Like, talk about greed. It's not enough that you're ripping us off. The
Yeah,
Teslas have had
just keep
8
in mind.
price increases in the last 2.5 years, totaling $30,000. Depending, I'm saying that's on the high end with the SUV model,
Across.
but it's
Yeah.
30 grand more to buy that than it did when it first came out. And the cost of producing it, okay, maybe it went up, but it's not like it went up because the cost of gas, therefore manufacturing. That's the excuse a lot of these companies are making. Hey, we're still running on fuels. The higher oil goes, the more our cost of production goes. Well, if you're eco-friendly producing vehicles, your cost should not change. You know what I mean? But so it is a business that is now becoming more of a business. They're trying to create this, dependence. And a lot of manufacturers, like if you buy a new a Chevy Volt or whatever, Bolt, if they'll put in a free electric charger at your house, they want to get you used to that infrastructure of having that, so that the next time around, you're like, well, I have this Chevy charger. I guess I'm buying another Chevy electric car, or my stuff doesn't work. Now, for the meantime, jacks still work. That could still charge another car. They haven't all become proprietary plugs. I'm sure that will happen at some point as people try to vie for a market in this field, but they're trying to create patterns. But it is far from a perfect technology. This particular photo here, this was in Alberta, Canada. This car caught on fire and kept catching on fire. The fire people kept putting it out. It kept catching on fire. They had to dig a trench around the car, a massive hole. That is 4,500 gallons of water. I don't know what
Wow.
that is in liters, like 11 or 12,000 liters of water just to keep the car, because the battery's in the floor of the car. So they had to dig a hole around it and flood it to completely submerge the batteries in water because they kept reigniting. That thing burned for a day before they could get it to go out. And if that happens in your garage, it's lights out and faster than you can react. Even a normal house fire, you got like 2 minutes to get out of your house. It's not like the movies where you grab the teddy bear, grab the puppies. By then you're choked out by smoke and you're done, right? Like it's not something you want happening anywhere, let alone with a vehicle that's supposed to have, nature in mind and be this really advanced technological. It's not. It is.
Yeah,
Even
the
cell
thing.
phones, Marquise, you were saying earlier, don't leave your phone plugged in. This
Don't
is
do that.
before
Yeah.
the show. You're like, don't leave it
Yeah.
plugged in overnight. It can cause the batteries to bubble. And anybody that's had a rare cell phone battery fire, usually that's been the case of it, right? It's been plugged in for too long.
Yeah.
So
Well, they leave it charging overnight, so it overcharges, and that it screws up the battery. So it's really bad. As a matter of fact, most people, every single person that's ever come in, well, I used to sell cell phones, but every person that ever came in with a swell battery, I always ask them the same thing: have you been charging your phone overnight? And like, what does that matter? Because that's why your phone's like this. But sometimes Samsung phones were actually older. Samsung phones actually were just swelling. They were swelling over time, even when they weren't even being used. Not all of them, but unfortunately there were quite a bit of them were swelling. We're talking from like S7 and before, but they don't do that anymore. They don't do that anymore.
And I mean, Tesla, we don't want to pick on Tesla. General Motors had an issue with the Chevy Volt where they have multiple cells. So it's supposed to charge one cell to 100 and then go to the next cell and go to the next cell. Well, there's computer chips in these batteries that tell the mainframe that, hey, this cell's good, switch over to the next. So the issue wasn't with the battery, it was with the module in the battery, but it was effectively not switching from the first cell to the next. So now you have a device that's charging 10% of a battery and then getting stuck in that mode, and the heat would increase and it was causing fires. Their cars were catching fire in their garage. And so the initial fix for that problem was put out a recall and reprogram everybody's cars not to charge more than 85%. Well, these vehicles don't have 1,000-mile range already, okay? They're pretty limited, 150, 200 miles max, and that's if you buy all the best gear. A lot of people needed 100% range out of their car. So now this thing's only getting 85% charge, therefore your range is only 85%. People are charging more often. It was a huge inconvenience, and it put a backlog in the system. So not only did it take upwards of a year to fix your car, you got to drive around at reduced capacity for a year. There's no money coming back your way. You paid for 200-mile range. You didn't get it. Oh, well. But it also pushed back all the orders on new vehicles because GM goes, well, if we just keep building new Bolts and somebody's neighbor gets a new one, meanwhile, mine's under recall, I'm going to have something to say to GM about this. So until they fixed everybody, they couldn't even supply. And then people were getting upset. They were waiting 2 years for electric cars. Rebate programs were getting changed. So you used to have $8,000 discount.
Yeah.
Now it's like $2,500, and some cars don't even qualify anymore. It just caused this tidal wave of problems. And, effectively, the aim of the game is to get rid of pollution out of the air. None of this so far has done any of that. Maybe you're right long term. Maybe electric will have. But again, at 5-to-1, 5-to-1 pollution versus coal with lithium mining.
Well, you can't argue with that.
5 times the impact, 5 times as fast, or we're not going ahead. We're still going back.
Yeah, you need to have more than that because you have to compensate for the acceleration of the pollution that you've caused. Plus,
unless you're getting, if 5 times, you would need that just to break even. So you need 6 times longer life, which they're not giving. 6 times reduction in mining the products to make them, which we're not getting. 6 times, longevity, resale value, like everything would have to be increased or benefited by a fold of at least 6 to make it worth doing. Right now, it is worse by a factor of 5. It's not going to be the way, not as it currently is, not unless we change something. I think biofuels is the way to go, man. You could change every single internal combustion engine on the planet in like a month's time. Sure, there'd be backlog initially, but it could be done. It would have to be done once. And there's literally a bunch of sources for biofuel, as we've showed, everything from garbage to, use French fry oil. You could use algae to create it. You can create new sugars in a lab that then ferment, produce alcohol, which is ethanol. That's effectively the end product as well. So it's not like just lithium. And there's way more oil and gas in the world, or oil, I should say, that can be produced into gas, but way more oil than lithium. Lithium will run out way faster than we will run out of oil, even with our current consumption rates. So I don't think the standard lithium, cobalt, nickel battery we have now, it will not give us the range we need, the price reduction we need, the renewability we need. It's not going to happen. I mean, look how well it's going so far. We're doing real good.
Oh, man.
We're killing it.
That's bad, man. That's bad.
That's how I got electric cars. Don't buy into the myth. If you think you're saving the planet, you're not. If you think you're saving money, you're not. The average person trades vehicles. I think the average trade cycle is like 42 months in Canada. And that's actually less than it was, only because of the pandemic and rising cost of things, people have transacted less. But the idea that you're going to have to own this car for 10 years before you see a savings. Do you want a 10-year-old car with a failing nav screen and nobody who can fix it? Like, that's a myth too. These things don't, there is built-in obsolescence in everything. Cell phones, cars, computers, all this tech has it. I think we'd be naive to think that this is going to be great. You'll only need one car the rest of your life and it won't produce anything. Not the way we're currently going about it.
Yeah, no, the only thing, the last thing I want to say is I always wonder if it has to be this way or if it's designed to be this way. Personally, it seems like it's all designed to be backwards. I think that if you have a chance, everybody look at the documentary Who Killed the Electric Car. There was a better way to do what we're doing today. We're just not doing it. We're doing something completely strange. And Louis, you laid out perfectly the problems that we have today, but that's not how it has to be.
Right.
That somehow and for some reason is just the way that it is. I think you should be asking yourselves why.
It's marketing. A Tesla will market itself as having vegan leather. That means it's vinyl. Okay.
Well, you gonna eat it? I mean,
Vegan
nobody's
leather
eating it
'cause
anyway.
it's cow friendly,
I'm just
but
kidding.
so
Yeah,
they even in terms of like their color codes for their cars,
yeah,
you know, I'll exaggerate, but it's like save the planet green, you know, like that's not an actual color
yeah.
of a Tesla, but they're coming at you with
Save the planet.
this image of
Yeah,
this is good, this is safe, this is sustainable, this is renewable, no animals were hurt in the making of this commercial. And on the other end of the planet, they're producing 5 times as much pollution as coal
yeah,
mining, which we know is horrible. Even the guys who dug the coal out of the
yeah,
ground had health problems. Now we burn it and put it in the air so we can all share in the same. And this is producing 15 times more. And a lot of these lithium mines are in countries that are not as advanced as we are. So there's no
right.
regulations on
Yeah,
pollution, and they're
yep.
not using environmentally friendly equipment to dig this
Nope.
stuff up. They're using cheap and dirty coal. So they're mining coal, using coal to mine lithium to produce more gas, more
Yeah,
CO2 gas that we're supposedly saving the planet on the flip side. And then you're going to have this 3,000-pound paperweight that you can't do anything with. I don't know. And it's a limited resource in the first place. It's not the answer.
I feel like Elon Musk probably has, a warehouse of robot dog riding monkeys with Neuralink ready to go mine that cobalt for us so that we don't have to worry about that.
Either
I'm
way,
kidding.
even if you mined it at zero carbon, or if you were carbon neutral at mining it, it's still not a last forever kind of thing. It is not an infinite resource. It's not wind or water powering a wheel.
Right.
It doesn't
Yeah.
have that kind of longevity. At some point, we will run
Or
out of it.
or sustainability. Yeah, the sustainability is not there.
Yeah.
It's not there.
And if we're going to do the work, let's do the work right. Let's not just go half measures. I mean, I think the whole world of hybrid cars, it's better than full electric because of the range. And now you have a car that fundamentally runs on electric motors. So all the wheels are powered by electricity, but you're only burning enough gas to run the electric generator. The car runs on the electricity. And that's where you spend most of your fuel, is from a dead stop to get a 5,000-pound truck moving. That's what burns the most gas. You burn way more gas in stop and go traffic than you do on the highway. And a lot of vehicles have used things like engine displacement, where they'll take 8 cylinders down to 4. Some 4 cylinders go down to 2 on the highway because you only need very little horsepower to maintain your speed. And then if you go to pass somebody or accelerate, it'll kick back in seamlessly. You don't even know. So, but again, it feels very reactive. It's just like, okay, that's kind of good. That's just like having really good pain killing cream for the cuts you keep giving yourself. Like, you just don't feel it as much, but you're not really
Yeah.
solving the problem, right? So if we're going to do this, it needs to be something that we don't have another energy crisis or pollution issues in 100 years time, so, but it's going to take
Yeah.
some sacrifices, not necessarily at the consumer level, but some sacrifices with who we allow to make these decisions and what do we consider fair and reasonable profit. I mean, people
Yeah.
that you may not even be against or fully for oil and gas. But if you have a stock portfolio and Exxon's making you money, you're going to turn a blind eye to that and just be like, well, everybody else is doing it. This, that's how this stuff works. I think fundamentally we have to change all of that before any of these real things will start to get any weight.
Yeah, and by the way, there are hydrogen fueled cars. Now, obviously, it's not like they're not what you think. You just like fill them up with water. There's an entire process. I don't have anything prepared for that, but there are hydrogen powered fuel cells that are available today. But they're not available for you to purchase in the consumer market, but they are functioning today. They've been functioning since I think 2016. And if you believe in the conspiracy about the guy who built a hydrogen powered car and drove across the country and ended up with some unfortunate circumstances, it's been going on for longer than that, a couple decades. They've been able to produce to use water fuel cells for quite some time. I don't know. Again, I don't have anything prepared for that right now, but I know that if you just look it up, you guys can definitely see that for yourself. There are better ways besides electric vehicles today. We don't have the infrastructure, first of all, for a lot of this stuff. We don't have the drive and desire for these alternative energy sources, or in this case, these alternative fuel sources for vehicles. And we've got a culture, and especially in America, the culture is about consumption. You mentioned marketing; it's all about consumption. So I think you should care about yourself, care about your future, and really think about the fact that technology is meant to help us. It's not meant to hurt us. I don't think we should resist these technologies. I don't think we should be afraid of them. I think we should put them in their place. We should use them as it benefits all of humanity, and we should embrace them. Ultimately, embrace them. You know,
Yeah.
and instead of rejecting them.
It comes down to money too, because now you're basically asking a government that's making money off of the oil and gas sector to
We need
halt
to
all of
eliminate
that.
the monetary system. Louis, my position: get rid of the monetary system.
That's a
Find a
whole
new
other
incentive.
episode. But effectively, you're saying, hey, stop taking any of the royalties that you need from that money and go and invest billions into changing so that you'll never need to use it again. Therefore, turning off that cash cow forever and now go pay to upgrade your infrastructure because private business can't afford to do it.
Mm.
Like I said, the company I work for, if they weren't well capitalized and if it wasn't part of their dealer agreement, like do it or we're going to take your franchise away, they wouldn't have spent the money either. So until it is an incentive or a rebate, well, rebate just means the government's paying for it. So until the government agrees that we're going to pay for this to encourage you to do it, but
Right.
essentially they're slapping their face twice because by them paying for that, not only are they not getting the revenue, but they are kind of getting out of an industry that made them where they are and paid their way into office.
Well,
It's
what's the
very
incentive?
complicated.
What's the incentive? You said it's
Exactly.
the incentive is the problem.
Yeah.
Some people say, and again, a whole nother episode, but some people say that without what will people do if they don't have the incentive of you either do this or you die? Well, I mean, I think we can provide better incentives than do this or die. That
Yeah.
sounds more like a hostage situation than an incentive.
Yeah.
Yes, there is an incentive to not die, but I don't think that should be the primary motivation for you to want to do something like contribute to society. I don't think that should be the
And this needs to happen at a global level. It doesn't matter how good North
Yeah,
America
it has
gets
to be.
with
It
carbon
has to be.
emissions.
Yeah.
If countries are putting straight pollution in the ocean, dumping plastics, a lot of recycled waste from Canada is actually getting shipped to Asia right now. It's the
Oh,
cheapest
man.
solution
Yeah.
for us to deal with it.
Yeah.
And they recycle it. But most of it, like I said, gets thrown out because people throw trash in with the recycling. You can't afford to pay somebody to sift it for what you
Mm.
get by selling it per ton. So they're going through, let's say the Philippines is buying container loads of recyclables from Canada. They're going through and making what they can with what they can. The rest is getting dumped in the ocean. That's why there's a massive plastics problem in the ocean. It's not just like people throwing them off of boats and cruise ships. How do you think there's hundreds of tons, metric tons of waste? It's because
Yeah.
it is literally getting dumped in the ocean. So it doesn't matter how good the Western world gets if other continents don't participate. It's all going to be for nothing. It won't make a difference because they have
Yeah.
population. And if 1 billion people are polluting, doesn't matter how good 300 million are doing, you're outnumbered 3-1. It's just going to
Yeah.
keep getting worse.
We can go on and on forever with this kind of conversation, but because it's philosophical, it's ideological. But there's this like, I don't know, boat or whatever that could pull all those plastics and toxins out of the water, out of the ocean. And it used alternative energy sources, some kind of wind energy and wave energy too, to keep going continuously forever. It could just keep, cleaning up the ocean, like combing the ocean surface of all these different plastics and garbage and trash. I still don't think it's going to be enough. I mean, if we don't focus on all the technology we mentioned today, the biodegradables, the genetically engineered things that could biodegrade things naturally, if we don't focus on all these alternative energies, and again, as you mentioned, globally, well, ladies and gentlemen, it's been nice knowing you. Hopefully our kids don't have to live through the worst of it. I mean, alone, that is, because you may make it through this crap, but the next generation or the following one might not. Who knows? Or maybe there'll be worse consequences of people living on this planet. And don't resist, guys. Just come on. Don't resist cool stuff. Don't you want to fly around like the Jetsons? Come on.
We're this close.
We're this close. There's going to be, I just saw an article that said they're hosting a race, a flying race car, or I'm sorry, a flying car race, or whatever. I can't remember where it was, but we'll have to look at that and pull it up some other time. But they're literally going to be allegedly doing a race where they're using flying cars, and they're let me actually, forget it. Let's look it up. I got to see this for you guys. Let's see here. The air speeder, the flying car, electric car. There's a race.
I know there are a few flying cars that have been given the green light to do some trials. My issue is people can barely drive on the ground.
Yeah,
How are they going to all fly around without a fender bender is now a 10,000-foot drop. My concerns are great with flying cars.
Oh
Have you
man,
seen
now it's
people park? Have you seen some people's parking jobs?
I've seen their park jobs for sure. I mean, I think with technology, I mean, most planes fly themselves for the most part. Landing and takeoff is usually the pilot's job. Maybe they can help automate some of those processes in the future where, you're not relying so much on I guess, I don't know, mental acuity. We're focusing more on the tech being able to help us, because that's especially when you're when you're flying, you can go at faster speeds than you are on the ground. There's no resistance, obviously, aside from aerodynamics, but you're not having to worry about the friction of like the ground and all those kinds of mechanisms. You're literally just flying through the air. There's a lot less resistance. That's dangerous. Yeah, I think that's really dangerous, but they're gonna do it anyway. So, you can buy a flying car right now, by the way. So good luck, everybody. But I couldn't find that freaking race. I'm gonna find that race.
There's a kit that you can build one yourself. There's actually helicopters you can build yourself too, although we don't recommend anybody do that. Do not build your own helicopter.
Yeah, probably don't do that.
So we're going to, if you guys want to see the rest of this episode, check out our Quantum Club. The link is in the description. We do record another episode at the end of every public episode we do here, and we can be a little more candid, unfiltered. It doesn't go on YouTube, so we can tell you how we actually feel. But we're pretty good at not holding anything back, telling you what's up, sparing you a lot of the junk that's out there. There's a lot of stuff. Again, we do the research on these topics. It's hard to find good material. A lot of these big corporations don't want this stuff to be easy to find either. And the ones that have it, it's proprietary. They don't want to get beat by their competitor either. So in the phase of initial developments of anything, it's hard to find out what's real, what's myth, and, to cut through the data of, is this just what this company says it'll do? Or like, what does private testing actually show? And, but there is a lot of positive stuff we can glean from that. So thank you, everybody in the world of YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and the UNX Network. These episodes release every Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. And you can check us out every Sunday at 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 p.m. Eastern. And that's on the UNX Network YouTube channel. So love hearing from you. Give us your comments and feedback. If you like this episode, give us a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do that. And with that, we'll bring today's episode to a close. And on behalf of my good friend Marquise Williams and myself, Louis Borges, thank you for joining us. We do appreciate your time. We hope you learned something, had a bit of fun. And we'll see you next week with the next episode of Quantum Ladder Podcast.